your hunger signals aren't normal,
Yeah.
you're going to keep eating until you can't. And that is a dangerous place to be in. These people already have some of the most unattainable physiques, natural or not, possible, and they are tweaking their photos. Why? My first bodybuilding show ever, I achieved the best physique I ever had at that point, objectively, and it was the worst. I was super depressed, worst I ever felt about my body. Relationship with food was terrible. There were quarterbacks who started for them in recent who've gotten death threats because of playing poorly. He's the best. There's a reason he's starting, right? He's starting because he's the best option they have. Do you think he wants to play badly? It's no. That the church is made up of broken people because we are all broken, we are all sinful. So I think one of the biggest characteristics of a believer, I couldn't get work done until I was so anxious about it that I had no choice but to start working on it. And that was the only way I could get anything done. My own roommate was told he was a waste of a $365,000 scholarship and that he should leave. All of the jokes were around the fact that if I was willing to sacrifice my body like that, I clearly had to screw loose. It's 2:30 a.m. I gotta wake up in 2 hours. And that was a very significant moment for me to be just felt wow, my whole world is caving in. But when my mom told me about her experience when her husband died, I go oh, I haven't had anything traumatic happen to me, is literally what I was thinking. So I'm I don't deserve to feel this way. There are people with much harder lives than me. Why do I feel this way? I was so worried about approval from them. I never would have told my parents how bad I was feeling or doing, so she did it for me. And that was one of the most terrifying moments for me. That was a really dark period of time. And this is after coming to faith. So it wasn't I came to faith and then I'm happy-go-lucky from here on out. You ask how I've been and content. I think I am content if I remember kind of all of these things that I've been given, and I am discontent when I forget those things. When I first started pursuing it, I was can this even be done? And I think my answer is yes, but it really depends on kind of your heart position and kind of what motivates you.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of David's Saturday Night Sit Back. In this episode, we are diving deep into the mind and the heart of Randall Royall, a powerhouse in the fitness industry and a beacon of hope for any young men, hopefully any young person that's struggling with mental health issues. Randall is a dedicated believer, a loving husband, and an accomplished personal trainer at Los Campeones. But his journey to becoming a natural bodybuilding pro and a respected mentor is filled with trials, triumphs, and profound lessons. Randall's story is one of resilience and transformation from his early days as a football player at Rice University, where he discovered his passion for training and community support, to his remarkable achievements in bodybuilding. Randall has consistently pushed the boundaries of physical and mental endurance. His journey took an unexpected turn when he dropped out of school due to a major depressive disorder, a challenge that reshaped his life. Randall, I can't wait to see where today's conversation takes us. Welcome to your episode on David's Saturday Night Sit Back.
Well, hey, thank you so much for having me and for reaching out. This means a ton, just to be here for your show.
Yeah, dude, you're welcome. I'm glad you responded. You won't believe how many people I message and I never hear anything back. So even if it's a no, I just get happy when people write back.
I hear you. I think I feel bad for not responding to I'll respond to a sales call and just be hey man, I appreciate you, but also at the same time, maybe not interested. But your opportunity was awesome. I didn't even know the connection that was made between one of our mutual friends. So really was out of the blue, but also super happy where we ended up and just how awesome you've been in the brief conversations and time that we've had. So this is going to be fun.
It will be fun. One thing you said on the phone that I'm surprised is a reaction you get is that sometimes when you meet people in person for the first time, they think that you're smaller than you actually are. Dude, you're huge. I'm having quad envy right now.
Well, I appreciate you. I think where that disparity comes from, and I would like to think hopefully not from a insecurity of my own, not that I haven't struggled with that, but more so that a lot of times if I'm talking about fitness, which is a lot of the time, unfortunately, I need to wean off it sometimes. But I get very passionate about it, so I talk to a lot of random people, and so sometimes I will refer people to my social media if they have further questions about their own training. And at the front of social media, and we've talked about this, for better or for worse, your body is kind of your advertising when it comes to personal training. And so people will see my old show photos, and I've had someone in person look at me, go look down, look up, and say, "Is this you?" I'm like, "Yep." And they're like, "What happened?" and what happens when it comes to bodybuilding is, you really are training essentially to make your physique look as good as possible for one day. And you do look good because you are incredibly lean and there's lighting, you're tan, all that stuff. But in reality, most people, even with incredible physiques, don't walk around looking like that 24/7. In fact, they don't look like that the majority of the time. And so a lot of people will see my stage photos, and like with this interaction I had with this person, they said, like, "What happened? Where, like, is it under there?" Was literally word spoken. I didn't take offense to it, but I think the disparity is at that point in my life versus that previous show, I had a lot more muscle, but the fact of the matter was I wasn't as lean. Therefore, it kind of gives the illusion that you're not as muscular. So it's kind of a weird position to be in, but I hope that people can understand that despite pursuing bodybuilding to the best of my ability, the fact of the matter is you're not going to look peaked. You're not going to look how you look on stage the vast majority of the time that you're preparing for it. So
And that's why I've never done bodybuilding. No,
there you go. Yeah.
No, when I worked in a gym for 11 years, started in the kids area, then did personal training for about 2 years, and then eventually moved into management. And that was where I had the most fun. And one of my buddies did a men's physique show, and we were probably a little younger than you. I think we were probably like 21, 22, 23 at the time. And the physical side of it, I could keep up with them. We were workout partners, and we were very close in strength, which was nice because we were constantly trying to one up each other. So we were naturally just pushing each other without really even trying to. Yeah. But when he was getting ready for his first show, he was really just, the diet had to be on point 24/7. My boy Tim got cranky. He got really cranky. Yep. And as I watched him go through that process, I like to think that I'm a pretty genuinely happy person. And I thought, I don't want to set up my life in a way where I'm going to force crankiness on myself because I haven't eaten anything that I would consider good. I've cut out all my cheat meals. I am calorie deprived because I'm trying to get as little fat as possible. And I have just accepted, Randall, that I'm always going to have a gut, and I'm okay with that. And that's where I'm at as far as my fitness journey goes.
Well, hey, to be completely honest, one of the hardest parts about this journey, and here, like, if someone wants to bodybuild, awesome, go for it. But at the same time, I want you to go into it knowing kind of the negative aspects of it, the challenges. Like with any sport that you compete in, there are inherent risks, but I would argue that bodybuilding tends to be very different than a lot of other sports. And you just mentioned one of the parts, like he was very cranky. Part of that can be due to hunger. Part of that can be because of like hormone issues and otherwise. And whether you are natural or enhanced, there are still risks that are involved. And I think one of the hardest parts is navigating that mental and social kind of aspect. Like our culture revolves very heavily around food, for better and for worse. And so when you restrict yourself, you are limiting a lot of things. But I would say one of those hardest parts are navigating kind of your social relationships as well as being consistent on that diet aspect. And that's a place where, I really struggled that first time. And I think accepting your own body and the phases it's going to go through is a huge sign for longevity, not just for the average person, but especially for a bodybuilder. Some of the hardest points as a bodybuilder are, well, body dysmorphia as a whole, as someone who's struggled with it. But one of the biggest things that stands out to me is, like, let's say you're someone that's starting cutting, like you want to lose weight. The beginning is really tough because, one, you have less energy. Two, in those first couple of weeks, you're not really seeing much detail show up. Even if you're perfect on your plan, you're losing weight at a good rate, you have less carbs, you're kind of like temporarily, because you have less glycogen in your body, you look smaller and you're not seeing those details. So you're like, I'm just smaller. Why am I doing this? And then on the other aspect of it, one of the hardest parts about bodybuilding that people don't tell you about is post-show. So after you get super lean, you just spent months getting as lean as you possibly can, getting as much fat off your body as possible. And then what? What do you do after that? And it's like, well, you don't realize that immediately you are kind of putting your body in a predisposed position to put on fat as quickly as possible. And some of that is good because you're at an unhealthy body fat percentage. There are some negative things going on. But the hard part is mentally. You just spent anywhere from like 4 to 5+ months trying to get as much fat off your body. And week 1, you can see it come back on. And that's okay. In fact, that should happen. However, man, that can be really, really devastating. It's like you're lean, you've got like striations where you shouldn't have striations, like in your butt and stuff. And then at the end of week 1 after the show, with eating bigger meals and maybe being a bit more bloated, you look and like, oh, abs are gone. And you're like, wait, how did that happen? And in reality, it's probably exaggerated based on all those reasons. But at the same time, you have to watch fat come back on your body, not to mention your hunger signals are not normal for months. And honestly, my first bodybuilding show, which I didn't even get lean enough for, I dieted for 6 months for and didn't get lean enough. Also, I made every mistake in the book. So very blessed to have done that now, because I won't be making those mistakes for my clients or myself again. But I dieted for 6 months, didn't get lean enough, and then regained somewhere like, it was a lot. I think it was like 20 pounds in 2 months. And so that's 8 weeks. So it's over, that's over 2 pounds per week. And that is a lot. And no one really prepares you, because I was like probably on point for my diet for like 5 days in a row. Then you go to a restaurant, you're like, oh, like I'm not dieting for a show. Like I shouldn't restrict myself from this. But not realizing that your hunger signals aren't normal. Yeah. You're going to keep eating until you can't. And that is a dangerous place to be in. So I want people to know that and be prepared for that post-show. There are healthier ways to go about it, but accepting that your body is going to put on fat is really important, and accepting that that's part of the process.
I've never heard someone say that out loud before. I've had two bodybuilders on the show, a guy and a gal. Both of them great conversations, but in those 2 to 3 hours that we sat down with each other, I don't think either of them touched on post-show. It just didn't come up. But so that's an interesting perspective to have, is that right afterwards you're watching your body go through that dramatic change. Because I see my body go through little fluctuations. I'll put on a shirt, it'll feel a little bit tighter, or I'll be in the gym and who knows if I'm actually bigger, but I'll look in the mirror and just be like, looking pretty good today. So I know I go through these very small waves, but since I'm not aggressively trying to cut weight, gain weight, my body has been pretty stable now for 5, 6, 7, 8 years since I've changed my goals from being fitness related to either around the podcast, personal development, whatever the thing may be. That's got to be a little bit of a mind. I want to say mind F, but does cursing bother you?
No,
I curse a lot, but I can turn it down out of respect for you if you want me to.
I am unbothered, so it is in your court.
It seems like it'd be a mind fuck.
It really messes with you, especially when, and this is something I want to mention as well, I think there's a subconscious belief for many people that if your physique improves, that you're going to feel better about your body. That is not the case.
Right.
In fact, it can be the opposite. For anyone that is hyper-fixated on changing their physique, you are bringing a lot more attention to that. And it's very easy to idolize and assume that by achieving said physique, all these other things are going to be better. And even if it's not a super conscious thought, there's kind of that belief, like people are given attention because they look fit, etc. But I've seen some of the best bodybuilders in the world. There are people who are incredible physiques and that edit their photos, right? And these people already have some of the most unattainable physiques, natural or not, possible, and they are tweaking their photos. Why? Because they're probably not super secure with what they look like. And so that's one thing. Don't assume that by pursuing bodybuilding, your relationship with your body is instantly going to be better. In fact, I would say the majority of people, it's worse. So you need to be very cautious when pursuing that.
I have a funny story, and then and then we'll jump into a couple questions I have for you, and and feel free to respond to this as well. A buddy of mine, let's call him Brian.
Okay.
Brian's in the gym, or he's in the locker room. I'm a avid user of the sauna. I love it. It's my meditative place. It's just my sort of my hideout for 25 minutes, 5 times a week. And anyway, so I go in the locker room, and Brian is sitting on the bench, and I sort of walk and peek over his shoulder, and he's editing a picture of himself. And I said, "What you doing there, buddy?" And he's like, "I'm just getting ready to post this on social media." I was like, "Cool, right on." I dress down, go in the sauna, spend 25 minutes in there. I come out, Brian's still there. I go and peek over his shoulder again, and I just say, "Are you editing the same photo that you were when I said hi to you?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, I just did. You've been editing that one photo for 25 minutes. And he's like, how do you know that? I said, because that's how long I was in the sauna. And he sort of just like puts his head down in shame, clicks his phone off, puts in his gym bag, and he's like, I should probably go now. Or something like that. Just like the fact that he accidentally let himself, to your point of getting, instead of just first off, this particular individual is in fantastic shape.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to edit anything. If he wanted to take a selfie, put on social media, regardless of his reasons, he would have looked great. And so the fact that he was sitting there for 25 minutes and still wasn't satisfied with how he looked in his own eyes, like, brother, we need to pray for you or something.
Amen. No, there's some stuff going on there. But I think, like, even for someone that's not struggling with that as much, we still, like, if you had 3 pictures and you were going to post one of them, you might pick the one where you look the best on average.
Right.
And so even if someone is trying to be transparent on social media, know that if they're doing a physique update, or even if it's just like a family photo, they tend to be putting on what's best on average. And so, like, I've tried to make it a point sometimes, and this is not a pat myself on the back, but I think one of the things that the fitness industry in particular really struggles with is full transparency, because it can be really hard, even if these people are, let's say, natural, and they're trying to be transparent about their bodies, and they're trying to encourage people with their post. The fact of the matter is, you're likely looking at someone in the best lighting, the best photo that they picked, even if it's unedited, with good angles, and you're comparing that physique to yourself, probably sitting on the couch or the toilet somewhere, and going, I don't look like that. And that can be really hard, because when it comes to social media, it's the same thing. Even if it's not about physiques, it's like vacation, wedding, they're having a kid. I'm getting older now, so it's like all of those things, and you're like, wow, everyone's life is pretty solid, and then comparing it to your own life. But it's kind of like comparing everyone's highlights to your behind the scenes, because the majority of people are posting good things. And because who likes posting bad, depressing things? I mean, I'll do it. But at the same time, it's like most people are posting about the highlights of their life. And that's really hard, and can actually rewire our brain chemistry to thinking that, oh, like, my life is not good. When in reality, what we're seeing on social media is kind of being fed to us, and the most popular things are things that gather the most attention and are usually, like, the extremes. So that's one thing. But fact of the matter is, the pressure to, like, want to post, like, the best of yourself is very present, for sure. Yeah.
Are you, I know I asked you this before we started recording, but for the sake of the audience getting to hear the answer, are you happy?
Yes, which is crazy to say as someone who struggles with major depressive disorder. I think it's helpful for me for there to be a difference between joy and happiness. And like, they're technically synonyms, but the way I kind of describe it is like there's happiness and there's like giddiness, which is kind of an emotion, which is not a bad thing, obviously. But I would say I am joyful, which is more in the lines of kind of being grateful and hopeful, which is not something that was true of me years ago. And a lot of that, and we can go into detail of that in a little bit, but a lot of that comes from having come to faith and like placing my hope and joy in Christ instead of kind of my circumstances or myself or my own achievements, which has been a very slow journey, but incredibly grateful, to be happy or joyful. Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how you answer the second part of this question,
Yes.
because I haven't had a lot of people on here who are Christians or men of faith or women of faith. The second part of that question is, let's say happiness is a recipe. So it's a list of ingredients, okay? What's currently missing from your list that would create the perfect recipe?
What's missing from my list is maybe it's something that is in the recipe that shouldn't be. So for me, I would say idolatry. And by idolatry, I just mean looking to other things, material things, as if those are going to fulfill me, as if those things are going to bring me the happiness and the security that I want. This can manifest in money. Money is not inherently an evil thing. The Bible doesn't even say money is an evil thing. It says the love of money. So looking for money is very easy for me to look at making more money and like being more secure in that and idolizing the pursuit of that. On the other end of the spectrum, we have fitness. There's this subconscious thing that I really genuinely believe that I thought by achieving a better physique that I would feel better. Even relationships, like my wife is incredible and my best friend, but when I started dating her, I kind of idolized relationships and thought a relationship with her was going to bring me fulfillment and wholeness. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to improving my physique, you know, my first bodybuilding show ever, I achieved the best physique I ever had at that point, objectively. And it was the worst. I was super depressed, worst I ever felt about my body. Relationship with food is terrible, right? I thought my wife, like when I started pursuing her, like in dating, I thought that that would fix everything. In reality, it exposed more things, right? And it's because everything else makes a terrible God, other than God. And so for me, when it comes to that recipe, it's just idolatry, worrying about the approval of others, putting material and worldly things on the level of God for fulfillment. So like when we have that hole in our heart, especially with depression and anxiety and like all these things, we try to grasp things of this world and be like, okay, money, career, like approval, like all of those things to try to like fill that void, but it's just kind of like a black hole and it's temporary in my experience. So
You, good answer, first of all.
Thank
No one's gone the angle of like, is there something in here that shouldn't be? What am I shoving in here to try to get to that ideal level of happiness or joy or gratitude? Like you were saying, there's a few different words that you could use. I like going the happy route because it's I think it's a word that anyone of any religious background, denomination, we all just sort of get that term, you know? And that's why I like to use that one. And it throws people off when you ask them if they're happy versus how are you? But I like that answer a lot. Let's go back in time a little bit. You grew up in Houston?
yes, originally grew up in Houston for a vast majority of my life.
Were you in a neighborhood, on a ranch? Like, take me back, like, way far back. First home, where was it in Houston, and what was it like?
Yeah, so for my first home, I think the first 14 years of my life, we lived in Briar Grove Park, which is kind of typical, like, middle-class suburban area in Houston. lived there for the first like 14 or so years of my life. Houston ISD. That was, I grew up with 3 siblings, and my parents who are awesome. My siblings all live in Austin now, which is so cool. But yeah, that's where I originally started. And when I turned 15, we moved to a different part of Houston to be closer to high school, where I went to Stratford High School. And then, I ended up starting playing football at Rice. So I lived in Houston a very vast majority of my life. In fact, I'm kind of a homebody. Like, up until a couple years ago, I'd say up until about 3 years ago, the longest I ever went, like, from visiting home in Houston, like my parents or my dad. In that case, I would say longest I ever went was like 3 weeks. And that was because I was like, actually, Hurricane Harvey, I went to Sydney, Australia to play against Stanford at Rice. And that was when Hurricane Harvey hit, so we couldn't fly into Houston. And we were in Sydney for a week, and then we had to fly into Fort Worth and stuff. So I didn't see my family for like 3 weeks. And at the time, that was the longest I'd ever went. So definitely a family person. Nowadays, living in a different city, things have changed. But yeah, definitely a homebody.
I heard this. I was listening to this podcast where every week they have a different theme. And so it could be like ghost sightings, interactions with natural disasters. Like, the topics are all over the map. And then they have 4 members from their audience call in and tell a 10-minute story regarding that topic. And one of the episodes recently was about, I think it was vacations gone wrong was maybe the theme. But essentially this couple was vacationing on one of the Hawaiian islands. I forget which one. And a storm came in, and the rain was so thick it created like a river that surrounded the beach. And they couldn't get back onto the main part of the island. Coast Guard couldn't get to them. They ran out of food. They were dressed for summer weather, and the temperatures dropped dramatically. And at one point, I'm listening to this episode getting like anxiety. Like, I know this person lived because she's here to call in and tell her story. But just thinking of that like doomsday scenario, it was a very uncomfortable 10 minutes for me. And you just brought that back with your story of her. No. I didn't mean, it brought back a memory, but yeah, dude, natural disasters are crazy, man. Oh. We forget that they're a real thing sometimes if you don't live in an area that experiences a lot of them.
It's so humbling. I mean, even there was a recent like kind of tropical storm that hit Houston, and my dad, like, his work couldn't work for a week because the city hadn't valued like that portion of the city to like give power back. And it just, like, in the grand scheme of things, it's definitely humbling because you've taken all these other things for granted, and like, I remember Hurricane Harvey. So like, Houston gets a decent amount of hurricanes. When I was a kid, Hurricane Harvey, everything shut down. There's some tornadoes that gone through our neighborhood, and the funny thing was there was one store that was open like the following week, and it was a Baskin Robbins. And so you had a line out the door at Baskin Robbins to like charge my Game Boy at the time. But yeah, it's just wild. Like, when we were in Sydney, Australia, we had friends of ours that were not football players send us videos. Like, they would like tube down like Rice University into where our parking lot was, because our concern was about a third of our cars had water damage, but depending on where we parked on like right by the football field in the parking lot. So we had people, like, we were crossing our fingers, and everyone was like filming a video. It's like, all right, it's like, oh, go back, is that so and so's car, and seeing what was underwater and what wasn't. So yeah, wild when those things happen.
Where are you? Are you the oldest, middle, or youngest child of the 3 siblings?
I'm one of the awkward middle ones. My two.
Don't manifest that over yourself. You don't seem awkward at all.
I'm just trying to speak truth. So I have 2 older siblings. They're technically half siblings. Their father passed away when they were very young, and then my mom married my dad, and they had myself and my younger brother. So older brother's about 9.5 years older. My sister's about 7 years older. And then there's me. And then my younger brother's 3 years younger than me. So, and now they all live in Austin, which is really cool.
That is cool. Yeah. When you were growing up, do you recall if there was even ever like some sort of disconnect because they were half siblings, or did your parents and even the three of you do a pretty good job at just looking at it as like, we are one family?
Yeah, for us, it was very weird to, like, I even say it right now. I'm like, they're technically half siblings because we didn't really think of it that way, and there's not really any difference there. And I can, not to speak for my older siblings, but I've heard from their mouths, like, my dad never made them feel like they weren't his kid. And so, yeah, that was something we didn't really think about, and we were super, super close. So, like, the first time I, like, did the math where my mom was like, yeah, your older siblings have a different dad, I was like, what? And, like, the world exploded.
How old were you? Do you recall?
Man, I just never thought of, like, I never thought about it. I was probably old enough to figure it out earlier, but, like, I don't think it wasn't really brought up. So I was probably like 7 or 8, and they were like, yeah, different dad. Maybe I was younger, but I remember it being weird, but I didn't think any differently of it. But yeah, so.
Do you recall if you suspected anything in the sense of, like, my older brother's black,
yeah,
and I'm white?
Yeah.
Like in this, was there any, like, subconscious cues like that you picked up on where you're like, something is not, I don't want to say off, but just like suspect. Let's go with that.
I think, like, after knowing all the dots kind of connected, but, like, it wasn't like I was suspicious before. It was like, that's just my older brother. That's just my sister. But yeah, then afterwards it's like, oh, that kind of makes sense because they look not only exactly like their dad, but my younger brother and I very much look like our dad, like the Royal side of the family. So my two older siblings are, actually, I probably knew this from a young age because they had different last names. They had different last names than me.
I was going to say, too, was there any pictures of dad number one up? Because you'd be like, why is mom hugging this man in all of these pictures?
Yeah, no, I think there was. I probably knew from a young age, or, like, could have been aware of it, but never really, like, processed it because I didn't think anything of it, is probably what happened. But yeah, it's like it's Corey and Haley Houston, and then my younger brother and I are Randall and Royall. So
their last name is Houston?
Yeah.
And they live in Houston?
Yep.
And then Royall is a pretty interesting last name as well. You guys are really just coming in with the power names here.
Yeah, hey, really lucky with that. It sounds like I should be on WWE, so, who knows. But yeah, the weird last name, like, we have 2 L's at the end of our name, which is, I think it was something like some of my dad's ancestors in, like, England or something. Their last name was Royal, and the Royals, like, didn't really like that, so they added an L to it. Like, the actual royal people, they're like, that's not cool, so have an L so it's different. Or
have
something.
an L.
So, like, yeah, literally. But I like the name. My first and last name both have 2 L's, so I'm like, that's cool. That's how easy to remember, I think.
It is easy. I had an easy time remembering it.
Nice.
What would you attribute the 4 of yours closeness to?
I would say initially it was community and spending time together, because I feel like, to be honest, didn't have a ton of community and friendships. Like, and not to say I didn't have friends, but usually my friendships were circumstantial, like the sports I played, school I go to, but the people that I spent the most time with, like my older brother, my sister, younger brother, and I, like, it would be anywhere from, I remember us playing GameCube and Super Smash together, like, all the time, and we spent as much time together as possible. And the weird thing, and something I've observed recently, is it wasn't until we became kind of adults that we realized we could talk to each other about real stuff. And again, if I speak about family dynamics, just know that I'm not criticizing my family. My father and mom are very loving, and they provided a lot of things for us. But we do come from a divorced household, and I think one thing that's worth mentioning is that growing up, we just spent all our time together, and we kind of leaned on each other just by proximity and, like, just being there. Mm-hmm. But we didn't really know how to talk about difficult things until we became adults. And we're like, oh, like these are people that actually know me super well and we can actually talk about these hard topics. But as a kid, it's just like, want to play Super Smash for 5 hours? Like, cool, you know,
Right,
and
right.
that was kind of our proximity. And, you know, I very much looked up to my older brother because he was 9 years older than me. I just wanted to be like him. I respected, you know, from a young age, he like loved football, for instance, and we had a barbell bench press in our garage, and that's kind of the beginning of my love kind of for fitness. Is I remember late nights. My older brother was not the most athletic person on his team. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he was the strongest, and that was probably because of all the work he put in. And so, like, I remember nights when he was like 15 or 16, and I'm like seven or whatever, and I would just hear the metal weights like clanking in the garage. And so when my dad, like heading into 8th grade, he was like, "You want to start lifting, son?" I was like, "Yes." I was like, "Absolutely." And you know, I went on Dad's program. It wasn't a program; it was 5 sets of 5 barbell bench press every other day. So that was our program. But
Still doing that, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's optimal. But yeah, so that was kind of beginning love for that. I loved my older brother. Respected him a ton because he was so much older. You know, just looked up to him a lot. My sister and I, when I was young, we kind of butt heads a little bit. She's like the nicest person in the world, but we butt heads because when my mom had to start working full time as well, she would like babysit us, and it's like, well, you're not mom, you know, and so like, so I think we butt heads for a very small time period, but she's incredible. She's one of my closest friends, and my younger brother and I butt heads a lot. I would not, like, for me, I don't really express anger very much, and the only times I can recall ever really doing it was usually video game related when I lost to my younger brother. It was weird. It was like my maturity got subtracted by like 10 to 15 years, and like I just get so upset because we were highly competitive and because we were relatively close in age. I think him being the youngest, trying to keep up with everyone else, he was just really good. And so I never admitted to him for a long time growing up, but I think he was better than me at video games. But I'd always get really angry at myself, like, oh, how could I lose to him? Like, blah, blah, blah. And which is so dumb. He's now he was my best man at my wedding. We're super close. But growing up, I think us being so close in age, we butt heads a lot. And
How close was the age again? 2 years?
so 3 years.
3 years, that's pretty close, yeah.
And so, like, going up through school, one thing that was hard for Roy was, you know, he was my younger brother for a lot of times, and that's not something he can control. It's just, like, kind of unfortunate. My older siblings were so much older and went to a different high school, so none of the teachers I had really knew them. But my younger brother, like, everyone knew, was like, oh, it's Randall's younger brother. And Roy, growing up, was heavier set. And I think it's just, like, genetic difference because we, like, ate the same thing and stuff. We grew up the same way. But Roy was always heavier set, at least up through high school. And so I, like, for whatever reason, had, like, a good genetic predisposition to, like, excel at some sports and stuff. So I know one thing that was really tough for Roy is, like, oh, he's the younger brother of, like, this athlete, and I put my entire identity into sports for worse. I was going to say for better, for worse. For worse, I put my entire identity into, like, excelling at sports in school, and that led to a whole thing. But I know it was hard for him, and I think part of our conflict, if anything, was kind of manifested in that way, just like kind of our structure as a family, and what you know, like, just because I was gifted a lot of opportunities to, like, pursue sports at a young age, and so he's just, oh, Randall's younger brother, you know, doing the same things.
You think Roy would listen to this?
I don't know. I think if he's not, he's about to graduate from UT this next semester, so I think if he's not busy, he might give it a 5-10 minute listen. But
So if he doesn't,
Yeah.
tell him just to tune in at exactly at 37 minutes, because Roy, I want to say, I get you, brother, because I was that younger brother who had an older brother that was bigger than me, stronger than me, excelled at sports. My parents put me in sports even though I wanted nothing to do with them. As a piano player, that's what I was good at. I wanted to be the nerdy piano player, and that's all I wanted to do. And when I got put on that field, because the coach, he would always give the kids a minimum of a couple minutes of playing time, because that's what, in my opinion, I do think that was a good thing to do, to make sure all the kids got on court at some point. But I was a soccer and basketball player, and for me, man, that was like the worst part of my weekend, was those 5, 6, 7 minutes of feeling like I looked like an idiot, couldn't get control over in basketball, my hand-eye coordination wasn't there. In soccer, my foot-eye coordination wasn't there. So Roy, I totally get you, and that is why I'm kicking Randall out of my home right now.
Roy, I think the really interesting thing about our family is that all of us siblings, including my sister, have kind of been chewed up and spit out by football in different ways, which is really unfortunate, because like I do love aspects of football a lot, but at the same time, like, we've all been kind of in a way like a victim to that. My sister, because she was a girl and she didn't like football really, and our household was like very obsessed with it. My older brother had a scholarship to play football at Air Force, and he was very passionate about football on his own. And, the unfortunate thing about going to Air Force is day one, he realized that's not what was most important at Air Force, right? It's like...
I haven't, not to interrupt you. Are you saying the military, or is that the name of a university?
Air Force University.
Never heard of them. Where is that? Here in Texas?
It's in Colorado. So that was his only Division I scholarship. And so he pursued Air Force Academy because they were providing a Division I scholarship for football. And day one, they start boot camp. And so he lost 30, 35 pounds. Like, he wasn't overweight, but he lost like 30 plus pounds in the first, 4 months or something. And it was just clear that like the military reasons for going to that university were far more important. And this is not criticizing the university, but for him, who put football like first and really was going there purely for football, that was really disappointing for him. He ended up like transferring to Texas State, and he ended up becoming a awesome rugby player there and stuff. But so like my older brother struggled with that. I put my entire identity in football, mainly for the approval of others, because other people like said I had skill and talent for it. Like, it's not that I did not like football. I did enjoy it. But at the same time, it's like, all of my parents' friends were through our youth sports, and like literally this took years of processing to get to this point. And this is not something I'm blaming my parents on, but as a kid, I genuinely believed, even though I couldn't have like processed this at the time, but looking back, I genuinely believed that I could like help my parents like divorce by being good at sports, school, and being good behaviorally, if that makes sense. And so I put everything I had into the performance of those things, and kind of like created this false image of who I was to like get the approval of others for doing that. It was very easy to put my entire identity into football, and that ended up backfiring when later at Rice University there was a football environment that wasn't very healthy. And so I was leaning on football to provide all these things for me, and then bam, like the second it became rough, or the second it became not a good thing because I've been relying on it, then everything else kind of spiraled. And whereas my younger brother, he had a lot of injuries playing football. And I think, to be honest, his last injury, you could argue, is the best thing that ever happened to him. And what I mean by that, and I think this is coming from his words, not mine, but like, when he played, he got injured his he played with a torn, like, labrum in his shoulder his entire junior year. He was offensive and defensive lineman. He played wherever the coaches wanted him, not where he wanted. And after that, he got surgery for his shoulder. And this 1 week after healing from it and doing rehab, he broke his foot. And so he broke his foot, because it was a rainy day and they were doing stairs inside, and he slipped and landed on his foot. Really dumb.
Oh.
And by the time he went through rehab, he went through recovery, and he was supposed to be healthy just enough time right before the season started, but his foot still hurt. So he's like, okay, just got to keep doing rehab until our rivalry game, his senior year. And it wasn't healed. And so he went to every practice and everything, and he goes, you know what, like, I think I'm done. Like, I it's not worth this. And the coaches at the school, criticized him. Like, I remember he pursued theater, and he lost 50 pounds on his own. Like, he's like, I don't need to be this big. And, like, he took steps to change his diet, and he didn't have to do football anymore. He started pursuing theater, got the lead role in a play, which was canceled due to COVID. But he, like, got to be in a big play, and, like, I think the head football coach after the play, like, came up to him and goes, looks like you danced pretty good on that foot. Like, that was the one thing they had to say to him, instead of him giving so much of his life to a sport that maybe he didn't really care that much about. And so my heart hurts for him, not because his football season didn't work out, but because, like, he had to go through all that for a sport that he probably didn't really care about. And so, point being, and then my sister had to bear with how intense, our family loved football. And, man, it was rough. So, like, I still like football. I like the sport itself, and I enjoy watching it. But the sad thing is, like, our entire family has kind of been, like, the victims of football and kind of the culture and the fanaticism around it, if that makes sense.
That story made me just want to give Roy a hug. If I ever see a younger version of you walking around HEB, I'm just, are you Roy?
Yeah.
You don't know me, but can I just, like, embrace you for a moment?
We're both annoyed because we get mistaken for each other now.
So you do look a lot alike?
Yeah. So Roy, just to, like, he's done most of this journey on his own. He weighed, I think this week he messaged me, but he weighed, like, in the mid 180s. And I think at his heaviest, he was, like, mid to high 270s.
And was that fat, muscle, or a combination of both?
When he was definitely at a higher body fat. So he was a heavier, hefty set offensive lineman build in high school. But he started losing weight in high school, and since then he's lost nearly 100 pounds. And he ended up being part of UT cheer. He played for UT rugby, which is awesome. He enjoyed it, and then he's like, hey, you know what? It was fun, but I don't really feel like doing that right now. I'm like, cool. And he's he's interested in, like, running now, and has kind of found avenues fitness-wise and health-wise that he's enjoyed. And for the first time in his life, I think what's really cool is he kind of gave himself the freedom, because he struggled with his relationship with food, and was very scared that the second he stops controlling things that he's going to, like, balloon back up. But these past few months, something that's very recent is he's kind of, like, not worried about tracking stuff as diligently as he did for the previous few years, and, like, his weight hasn't ballooned up. He's maintained his healthy, like, lifestyle. He doesn't have bodybuilding goals, but I think he's in a much healthier spot than he was even, like, a year ago when it comes to food and stuff. And so it's been super encouraging to see him kind of venture forth on that journey. And of course, I'm always here to give him too much advice that he didn't ask for, because it's like, this is what I love talking about, and he's one of the people I care most about. So I probably will, like, smother him with, like, too much information. It's like, oh, you could optimize things, or, like, make things healthy, et cetera, blah, 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 and talk about all these things. So Roy, I apologize for how many times I've done that. But yeah, so it's been super cool to see his own journey with that.
When you mentioned it vaguely, when did you start playing football? You remember your first year that you played?
First year I played tackle football was first grade. I was 7 years
you were
old.
Playing for a while.
Yeah. Good amount of accumulative head trauma at that point. But
we can tell.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Hey,
sorry, I don't know you well enough to start making mean jabs yet.
Oh, you should. Okay. I am unbothered. But yeah, so the first time I played tackle football was first grade. I did 2 years of flag prior to that. Started a little young in terms of my first year, I remember my first football practice ever. I came to the car crying because
Why?
We did a what do you call a drill? It was like 1-on-1 where you're on your back and you turn around, and there were people like 2 years older than me on the team that had played like before, and I just got wrecked. And actually, I wasn't crying, but my mom was in the car and she asked if I was okay, and then it was like. But
was it a shame thing or like I'm just in pain and I've never had my body rocked this?
I think it was kind of I'm in pain and kind of like that wasn't fun at all. I was like I just just got smacked around and I didn't know why, but like my dad said, hey, like let's just do this season. If you don't like it, you can stop. But yeah, it was, so that was my very first experience, and I was just younger than most people, starting out.
You would have been like 6, right? You said first grade?
Yeah, first
like
grade.
6 or
So
7?
I was 6 or 7, and I was playing with some kids that were like 8, and that's a big disparity at that younger than age. But yeah, after that, things got a lot more experienced, and
what kept you going?
I think eventually, like when it came to sports and otherwise, from a relatively early age, I started, like I hit a big growth spurt and got bigger than like a lot of other people at a young age, and was given a lot of attention for success and accolades in different sports. So I think that approval made me like want to pursue those sports a lot. And I really, after that, yeah, it was just easy to put my identity into that because other people gave me like a lot of attention and approval for succeeding in those sports. And then my dad is a sports fanatic, and so like my dad usually like very intelligent with his money, didn't spend things that weren't necessary. But when it came to sports, spared no expense. We got the best cleats, we got the best helmet, got baseball lessons, which are not cheap. Not for any sports that we wouldn't be good at genetically, of course, like soccer and otherwise. But like for baseball and football in particular, we were given a ton of things essentially. And so I don't know if you've ever read this book called Outliers. It's pretty interesting, but one of the studies is on hockey players and how there's a disproportionate amount of professional hockey players that are all born within 3 months of each other. And what's really interesting about that is I was held back in kindergarten. So I repeated kindergarten twice so that I would be older because I had a summer birthday, and my dad had a summer birthday growing up, and he was the youngest, and he didn't want me to be the youngest. So the reason I mention outliers is because the reason these 3 months they theorized people were far more successful was because they're older than everyone. So there's a higher % chance that they're deemed as talented at a young age. Therefore, they're given more and more attention and exponentially increase their chances of success when it comes to that sport. And so I think for a very same reason, I was held back. I hit a growth spurt at a young age. People gave me a lot of attention for that sport, and they're like, oh, he's going to be a great football player or something. And so because of that, there was a lot of investment to me by other people to pursue those sports, and then it kind of like, goes from there. And I think that was part of the initial reason. Like football was just what I did after a couple of years, like football, baseball, basketball, track. I did all those things, but it became clear that like football was kind of the big thing for me. And so, yeah, it was very easy to start putting my identity in that. I mean, like as a 4th, 5th, 6th grader, I was watching film with my dad, like my older brother playing football at college or like being super passionate about it. My dad being incredibly passionate about it. Houston Texan season tickets, UT season tickets. So it was very easy for me to kind of get caught up in that and go like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to be an NFL football player. So that was kind of a lot of my motivation early on. I love team aspect. So
We'll come back to football in a second.
Yeah.
But no, I don't want to go that route. Did you even enjoy it? like towards the later years, freshman, sophomore, let's not venture into college yet because I want to leave that as sort of its own topic. Do you think that you were being driven by the fact that you guys were season ticket holders, you were getting that attention? Were you having fun?
I think so, but I actually can't say with confidence. I think there were aspects of the game that I really loved. I always loved pushing myself physically. That was something that was always relevant. Thus, me eventually discovering, I actually really like the training aspect of all this. I think I loved kind of the camaraderie aspect of it. And I love the outlet specifically that football provided. From a young age, I got burnt out baseball. Like by the time I was 9, the time we were 10 years old, it became so professional. And I'm like, I was not a big fan of it, to be honest. And I knew that from an early age. But football, I really liked the physical outlet. Not to, I don't think I was a violent kid, but I guess I played
Maybe
video
if
games.
you hadn't played football.
I played Halo 3. No, but at the same time, it was such a great physical outlet. And you're saying I could try, physically, as hard as I possibly can, I could, I guess, hit someone or move in this way and not injure that person I could just go full throttle on something and try as hard as I possibly could physically was something that I really loved. And then I love the team aspect of encouraging other people. And still one of the things I'm the most honored by, in any achievement I've earned, one of the things that meant the most to me was my senior year of high school, my teammates voted me the Fighting Spartan Award, which was not MVP or anything. It was more of an encouragement and leadership role, and that meant far more to me than how many tackles did I get, what was our I guess record or otherwise. Not that I didn't care about those things, but I think for me, I really loved kind of the teammate aspect and being kind of in the trenches and working hard with my close friends and encouraging each other to go beyond what we'd be able to do on our own. So I did love those aspects of it, and hitting is fun. I do miss that. I will tell my wife sometimes I'm I don't miss football practice, but I miss tackling people. That was fun. Because I probably won't tackle anyone anymore. I hope not. Might be bad context if I do, but yeah.
I have a friend that's a stunt actor, and if you want to tackle him, I'm sure he could somehow manipulate it so that you don't do any damage. He's a professional faller for a living. He's got shot out of cars, thrown out of buildings, and the guy's doing great physically. So a tackle from Randall Royall may not be too bad.
Yeah, low key, part of me considered pursuing being a director or something because I love movies so much, or a stunt coordinator because just I'm very passionate about that kind of stuff. But yeah, that would be really cool. High respect for stunt work. That's so cool, and that would be a cool way to physically exert yourself. So
yeah, his Instagram page is one that I do when I found it for the first time, it was easy not to spend a lot of time on it just because you're just holy, you're seeing it without all the stuff they take out, right? So you're seeing all the cables and sort of the behind the scenes of what it actually looked like when it's being filmed, and it's when you sort of get to lift the veil of the movie, I suppose.
Yeah.
To me, it was just it's very fun to look at. But
so cool.
Yeah. So in regards to school, so you graduate high school. And did you go straight to Rice University next, that fall?
Yeah, in fact, I went that summer.
It's a quick transition.
Yeah, because they like to get, if you are a Division I athlete, they don't want your hours to be as much during season. And so they want you to get into the summer. Not only can they implement you into the team faster and start your conditioning and training, but you also won't have to take as many hours during season. So...
How old do you recall how old you were when your parents either told y'all that they were going to split up, or When was that?
Yeah, so my parents, they lived in the same household until my younger brother graduated high school. But they told us as early as I think I was 13. I think I was about 13, and they had stopped sleeping in the same bed earlier than that. So it was a pretty young age, and I do still remember the first time that my dad brought it up to my younger brother and I. It was right before we were driving back from vacation, so we sat with that in the car for the next 3.5 hours. But yes, that was about the time when we found out.
And how did that impact the family dynamics? Do you recall?
It definitely impacted a lot, but the weird thing was, and again, when I say this, I don't want to criticize my parents too much in this, but at the same time, like from the dynamics that I've observed, I think there was this difficult case of there always being the elephant in the room that this is going on, but no one ever really talked about it. Mm-hmm. We had that individual moment where it was talked about, but there wasn't a lot of talk about it that we ever saw between my mom and dad, nor did our siblings talk about it. We kind of just put it off, and like, I think to cope, looking back, I didn't realize, but looking back, you know, I never went out or anything. We kind of just played video games or like wanted to do anything that was distracting, like media and stuff. So I think it definitely impacted my life a lot, because I think I idolized relationships, like romantically and stuff, from a young age. I don't know if it's because of my parents, maybe partially, but that was definitely impacted. And I don't think my parents never specifically said this, but they almost, it felt implied to me that they didn't really want things to change or want other people to like know, which is understandable, that like to not go around talking about it like a ton. But at the same time, I almost felt like I had to hide the fact that they were divorced. So like only I kind of really knew, and they kind of kept up appearances with like all of our friends at football games. So like most of my friends didn't even know, unless like even my closest friends, like some of them I kind of told my senior year, but they didn't really know, and nor did I want to talk about it a lot. But yeah, so it was kind of this weird elephant in the room at all times situation. Like the amount of times my younger brother and I like talked about it, like prior to me going to college, like 0 times. And despite us being like the closest two people, right? And which is really weird. But
outside of that, did you guys run quite a bit by each other?
Like in the future, we definitely have talked about it a lot and kind of processing our own side of it. Like, how has it impacted us? And like, to be honest, we have since talked about it a lot, and that's been awesome. And that's one of the reasons my older siblings and all my siblings and I have gotten a lot closer, because we realized, oh, my siblings are some of the people I'm the closest to who know me best, and I can actually talk to them about serious things, and they've all been awesome about that. But we didn't really have that experience growing up, and to be honest, like when it came to the divorce, it took, so through our church we have recovery ministries, and I went through Steps to Gospel Recovery, which is awesome. And it took that to make me aware of how much the divorce had affected me and still affected me.
How old were you when you did that?
That was 2 years ago.
Okay.
And so for context, you know, if I was 13 when I was told about that, this is like 7-8 years later where I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that affected me, you know, like, and it's funny because it's like on paper, I would have been like, yeah, I'm sure it affected me.
Right.
But I didn't realize how much it did. And I mentioned this earlier, but I'm not one that expresses anger much, which is true. And so like when we're going through something called inventory in our Steps to Recovery, that's basically where you take inventory on kind of like all of your sins and emotions, like sins done to you and sins that you have committed. And 1 week is on anger. And I kid you not, I was entering the week and I go, this is going to be the easiest week ever. Like, I don't get angry about anything. And what I realized was just that my anger manifests in different ways. I don't have a lot of moments where I have a knee-jerk reaction of anger other than 10 years ago when I played Super Smash. But, like, other than that, like, I really didn't express anger much. But my anger manifests in different things, like bitterness, like me not wanting to pursue a relationship with my parents kind of subconsciously, feeling like a tension there. And what I realized was happening is, like, I never forgave them for it. Like, when my parents would bring it up, I would say, hey, don't worry about it. It's no big deal, to try to spare them. When they're like, hey, like, has the divorce affected you? I remember in the past lying and kind of just being like, hey, like, don't worry about it. Like it's okay. Like, comforting my parents. And not to say that there's nothing, like, good with that, but in reality, I was kind of ignoring my actual feelings of it because I was concerned that if I told, for example, my mom that it affected me, then I was worried about how she would respond. Like, not negatively, but I was worried she would feel terrible. And so, like, I kind of, in an effort, tried to spare her feelings in doing that. Now, since then, after going to gospel, like, recovery, I've had conversations with my mom expressing, like, some of the hurt that I've experienced, but also being able to, like, in person forgive her, and more importantly, in my heart, actually forgive her for all of those things. And that conversation went amazingly, praise God. But for years, I, like, just kind of harbored this bitterness and tried to, like, I say I'm serving her by saying, yeah, don't worry about it and all this stuff. But in reality, I was kind of just, like, pursuing a comfort idol myself of going, like, I don't want to deal with this, like, like, et cetera, and maybe my heart was in the right place by not wanting to tell her things, but in reality, I was actually very bitter towards her and towards my dad, and that took a lot of processing. And I just had a conversation with my dad apologizing for my bitterness that I've been experiencing towards him. And I haven't, like, avoided him or necessarily, but, like, subconsciously I've just had these negative, like, thoughts towards him or talked about him negatively to other people. And we recently just had that conversation, and it was amazing, but admittedly it was really, really hard. I had great counsel from other people, like, heading into the conversation. Like, what I wanted to do was go, hey, Dad, I'm angry at you, but it's your fault because, and then, like, list a million reasons of why. But that wasn't the right thing to do. And, I'm thankful for my friends and counsel who people, like, prepared me kind of for that conversation of, like, one, I did not want to have that conversation, but two, if I value a relationship with my dad, that was something that was really important to do. But it also took me, I realized that was something important to do 2 years ago. So it took me like a year and a half to process a lot of things and actually, like, forgive him before I could even take that step forward and be like have that conversation. Because when you go through these things in recovery, I was thankful for my my mentor who helped me process this. When I realized how angry I was towards my parents, I'm like, oh, I need to apologize ASAP. And then he's like, okay, are you wanting to apologize because you have you actually done the heart work to forgive them, or do you just want to apologize because you feel bad? And the reason for that is, like, are you prepared for them to respond in maybe a way that you can't control, because you can't control how they're going to respond. And it went well now looking back, but, like, I didn't know how that was going to happen. So I felt all this worldly guilt of, like, okay, I need to talk to them right now. And it's like, well, you haven't even done any of the heart work yet. And admittedly, that took a while. But yeah, praise God that it went well, but admittedly was super hard. And without friends to kind of, like, prepare me for that conversation, it would have went very differently. It would have been a backhanded apology because I would have been like, hey Dad, I'm sorry for my bitterness, but also feel bad about all these things, please. And yeah, that would not have been a humble way to go about it. Yeah, so sorry, tangent. But
You went to AA for divorced kids.
uh,
Or kids of the divorced.
Yeah,
So
more
when you
or
were
less.
talking about like the steps and the inventory, I definitely saw some parallels here.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
like,
so it's structured similarly. It's very much structured similarly. However, like the biggest difference is being like Christ at the center of it. Some of the steps are modeled similarly, but the biggest thing is like the first step might be to admit, but the difference between like AA and the recovery through our church is for AA, it's like admit you have a problem, but for our church in recovery, it's like admitting that we are powerless against those issues, like on our own, in our own power, and that's a pretty important kind of like a pretty big distinction. But yeah, like the basic steps and the structure is very, very similar. And I originally went for very different reasons. I did not go because I'm like, I need to be healed from like my hurt from divorce. I was like, that was not even a thought when I went to recovery. So yeah, it's funny how the Spirit works in that way.
yeah. Even though we are talking about topics that are maybe slightly heavy,
Yeah.
are you enjoying yourself?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you for this is awesome. I could do this for too long. So
We hey, and if we do, I mean, I got nothing planned this afternoon except going to the gym and getting a good chest pump in, hopefully. But
awesome.
yeah. Let me get myself refocused here. So high school to college. Let's go
Yeah.
back to that for a second. Rice University. Were you considering anywhere else, or how did you or your parents or anyone involved? How did you guys essentially land on Rice specifically?
Yeah. Rice, given the options, seemed like the most obvious, very obvious choice for me.
Because of the football program, or
Yeah, so I was offered a handful of scholarships. Ironically, some of the military schools, so like Air Force and Army, had offered me, and then I had partial scholarships from Division II schools, including like Harvard and some of the Ivy League schools. But Ivy League schools can't provide like full scholarships for athletes. Because they're not like Division I and such. But I was offered from Rice, and that seemed the most obvious because it was in Texas. It was Houston, let alone. It was like 5 minutes from my dad's work.
going back to the homebody side of you?
Exactly. I and my uncle went to Rice. So to be honest, growing up, I always wanted to play football for UT. Half my closet was burnt orange. It's a lot. But I always wanted to go play for UT originally. And like I went to all the UT football camps and stuff, like and all that stuff. But Rice University was such a blessing. It seemed like such an obvious decision. I was like, hey, I did my NCAA Road to Glory at Rice anyway, so like all that creative player stuff. But yeah, so that was a pretty obvious choice for me at the time.
So when you showed up, what was different about the football culture in your high school versus the football culture at Rice?
I think first off, it definitely became way more business-like. Like in high school, it's like you went to high school and you played football. In college, it was you played football, you're also going to school. And I remember my first day of like full pads and like, everyone showers together. I never really like had showered with anyone. And like this dude who was bald and like full beard, tatted everywhere, like comes out of the shower. I'm like, that is not a high schooler. It's like that was one of my. So like there were some obvious differences initially, culture wise. It's interesting because originally what kind of happened that changed a lot is the coaches I was recruited by got fired after my freshman year, so they cleaned house, and then new coaches came in. And I'd say that was where a lot of the culture, I mean, our first year there might have been some issues, but it was more like we sucked rather than like as a whole. But like my head coach, like Coach Bailiff at the time, who had recruited me, he really cared about the players, and that was super obvious. Like I remember him being emotional because he couldn't get more wins for like his seniors, you know, people that had been with him for a long time. And he was always an awesome, like he always thought about the players first, and that was really cool. And from my experience now looking back, I think that is often a rare thing in college, because more of what happened post that was a lot of people getting treated like numbers, you know. And I get it to a degree. I want to have sympathy because like there's a lot of pressure for coaches to win. And yeah, before getting into all of it, you know, I know that a lot of the coaches my sophomore year, new coaches, were trying to get a lot of people kind of out, like to leave, because if scholarship players left, they would have more scholarships to use on people that they wanted to recruit, you know. And I feel like that is a fairly common thing that happens when new coaches come in. We literally, like, you might have 20 plus coaches on a staff, and my sophomore year, like, one or two coaches stayed, like, were kept. Everyone else cleared house. And so that is a lot by itself, even if it's handled really well. And I don't mean to cast shame on like individual coaches or anything, and I won't speak any particular names, but I would say that was not handled well. Yeah.
Let me ask you a potentially silly question, because I'm not a football player. I didn't even consider doing athletics when I went to college. What's like the business incentive for a coach to win games in college? Does it get the school more money, or what's the incentive there from the coach's perspective, or even from the university's perspective? Do they have an incentive for their teams to be winning games?
Yes and no. So this is where it gets interesting. So if we're talking about like the politics of sports, this was one reason they fired my previous head coach. He was such an advocate for us players at the detriment to getting more money to the university. And what I mean by that is, let's say if you watch the best university football teams play, let's take a Alabama, let's take a UT and all this stuff. You'll notice that their out of conference games are usually against bad teams. What happens with those bad universities, and I would qualify, and I love Rice, so I'm not hating on Rice, but I would qualify Rice as a bad team. And there are many reasons for that. But what happens is these big universities will quote unquote bid and pay money to the small universities so that the universities will agree to play them, because they are automatic wins. And so there's incentive for athletic directors to get their team more money if they are quote unquote a bad team by playing these worse teams, because their record is easier for it to be better. And so our head coach was advocating against that. He was like, we don't need to play the best universities like in the nation. And from what I understand, I think he was pushing against that, which didn't help his case when he left, you know, or when he was fired, I should say. It's worth noting that when he left, he went on to coach a like Division II football program, and they won a championship, which is awesome. But yeah, so there is a ton of politics, and if you look at Division I football specifically, it is the only NCAA sport that is not structured the same way when it comes to like tournaments. Like there are bowl games, right? The existence of bowl games is purely for money, because every other sport in college football, including Division II football, is a sports playoff that spans a lot of teams because that's considered most fair, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to like Division I football, it's a whole other bag. So I would say that's kind of the incentive for the university itself. And when you're a bad team, the university's priority is not, let's win some games. The university is like, how can we make money? And even Rice University, when you look at all the sports that they have, Rice University is not known for like how great of a football team they are. In fact, like the women's volleyball team when we were there, I think like were incredible. But Rice football made more money than any other sport by a long shot. And that's just because of how popular football is, and that's because of how much they're being paid by the other universities to play those games. So,
And that money eventually funnels to where?
we had nice equipment. But like that money.
So the players do benefit.
Yeah. I would say the players benefit, but also the coaches. So like even at Rice University, like our head coaches make millions of dollars. So like getting paid very handsome amounts.
It's crazy, man, how I forget if you said this on the podcast or before we started we hit record.
Yeah.
But it's funny sometimes how you see these different systems, be it football or some other crazy system, such as like how a city is dealing with their homeless problem, or how just like you take any system and then if you start to dig into the motivations behind it, how it's money driven. It's really wild to me that like. Because on the surface, it's like, can't these kids are now men and women, adults, by the time you get to college, can't these adults just show up and play and like, it's literally called playing, you're playing a game here. And it's, I've never thought about, like I said, I haven't had a lot of people with a sports background on the show yet. And so we haven't gone down this rabbit hole, and it's sort of a disappointment in a way, that it's how financially driven it is. I didn't realize that before this conversation.
And it's worth noting that this is before any NIL stuff was relevant.
What's NIL?
NIL is kind of the recent rules that now athletes can get paid for their likeness. And that is a huge deal. So like, if you want to know, let's take, for example, a university like Rice University versus UT. Why is Rice University, on average, going to be much worse in the future than UT? There are a lot of reasons, but some of the biggest ones are like financially, and now with NIL, players can get paid for their likeness for advertising and otherwise. So what is the incentive? What is the biggest incentive for college players to go to big name universities where they'll be a star player and they have the opportunity for sponsorships? Well, it's money. But even before that, that was still kind of relevant. Like Rice University is awesome. I love the students. It was really cool. I love the professors and stuff, so I'm not hating on it. But for context, if you go to Rice University, a lot of the students, you have the highest percentage, I think, in most universities of like students from other countries, which is really cool. But at the same time, people aren't going to care as much about football. In fact, some of the students didn't like student athletes because they felt like they didn't deserve to be at Rice because Rice was so hard to get into. And you still had to qualify to get into Rice as an athlete, but like you just had to meet the minimum requirements of the university required, whereas most students that get into Rice, like, it is really hard. So the weird thing is culturally at Rice University, like some students weren't big fan of athletes, and because you had the highest percentage of like out of the country like students, not everyone grew up like Texas football culture. That's very different, right? And so whereas people would give their right leg to just be on the field for UT or Alabama. So the reason that's worth mentioning is how many walk-ons are you going to get at Alabama and UT versus Rice University? Who wants to go to a university that is expensive, where the work is really, really hard educationally, and you're going to play as a walk-on for little to no recognition compared to a university like Alabama or UT? So like already there's this disparity, right? It's already hard to get into Rice, but now you throw in NIL deals and people are getting paid. Bijan Robinson for UT a couple of years ago is getting paid $5 million a year in advertisements, like in sponsorships. And the coaches can't directly like pay athletes, even though there's been that shenanigans going on, corruptness like in the past, but coaches can't do that. However, if you are someone that donates to the university, you could create a, let's say, like for UT, for example, they had a really bad offensive line a couple years ago. And so some people who donate to UT created hey, we're creating a nonprofit company, and we want people to speak for this nonprofit business. The only requirement is that they're new offensive linemen. And that's the only requirement. And essentially, they are getting paid $40 to $50,000 for going to UT as an offensive lineman. So that was incentive via people that pay a lot of money to the university. And the universities with the most money, obviously, are going to draw the best people. And because money, like if you are someone who is coming from like a household that doesn't make a lot of money and you're getting a scholarship, like heck, like why wouldn't you go to the university that's going to pay you the most? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the really difficult position to be in. And NIL is a really complicated topic because there's a situation with like an LSU athlete, for context, that I think he got paid $3 million total before he stepped foot on the field at LSU. He was just
wow.
Yes. So
dang, boy.
So get this. This is a great story. So he was highly recruited, 5-star quarterback, and so they know he's going to be a star of LSU, right? So he started getting all these advertisements, started getting paid like tons of money, and you know what? He goes, I don't really feel like playing football, and I'm going to pay for the rest of my education because I just got paid $3 million. So he didn't play football. And the university's like, wait, what? Like, what's going on? And what ended up happening was, I guess the guy, was either upset that he didn't start immediately or just didn't really want to play football that much. And after he got paid, now I assure you that universities are going to have clauses in it that require you to like play or something, and people are going to be more cautious about that. But the fact of the matter was, as NIL came back out, this kid is fresh out of high school and has gotten paid over $1 million because he's going to this university, right? So what if you're the best football player at Rice University and you're a sophomore, and then another university is like, hey, do you want to play for us? Why wouldn't you? And just financially, and also the attention of these other universities. That's why the bad teams tend to stay bad and the good teams tend to stay good, especially now with NIL. So I'll get off my my podium now. But the sad thing is, when it comes to like college football, it's easy to forget that these are kids. Like, these are like teenagers, young 20s, and
that's still really young.
They're trying to navigate all this, like all the politics. Some of them just want to play football, right? But like some of them are also trying to save money for their families and stuff. And all these universities are just like, play for me, play for me. There's all this pressure for money. There's this pressure to win. There's this pressure to, et cetera. And they are just kind of, a lot of them are victims. I mean, maybe not the guy that made $3 million and then didn't have to play football, but at the same time, like a lot of them are victims of the sport itself. And it's sad. And like, even for me, it provided a lot of context, but I stepped away from it because I would watch Rice or I'd watch other universities, and I'd see a casual fan or like a parent or just one of my friends just kind of like casually be like, gosh, I can't believe how terrible this person is. Like, how could they do that? And they know nothing about football, but like, how could they like mess up on that play? And there's so many nuances and stuff. But like, there are kickers who are, like, have life threats, like, like people are threatening their lives when they miss a kick and they lose a game, right? And it's like, these are kids.
How so? Like on sliding into their Instagram media messages, or?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like if you go to like a LSU, if you go to UT, like even UT for context, like there were quarterbacks who started for them in recent who have gotten like death threats because of playing poorly. And it's like, these kids, like, he's the best. There's a reason he's starting, right? Like, he's starting because he's the best option they have. Do you think he wants to play badly? It's like, no. And like, I'm not saying there's no place for criticism ever, but at the same time, like, these are kids. This isn't the NFL where people are getting paid millions of dollars to run the football or to be a quarterback and stuff. Like, I feel a little more fine criticizing those, but these people are like playing for scholarship. They're trying to do their best. And here we have casual fans like talking bad about them, but then you do have the other percentage of people who are like, people that donate to a university. It's like, this level of football play is unacceptable for my university. So like UT makes more money football wise than any other. Here I am criticizing UT as a UT fan. My wife went to UT, right? Like here I am. I'm part of it. I am the problem. But yeah, so it's weird, that dynamic. Like, I love to sit back and love to enjoy the sport, but like playing the sport itself provided a lot of context, and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Some coaches out there I know objectively are amazing and really love their players, and that is awesome. But I have also seen the opposite of that, and it sucks. And I know firsthand when I was there, I had all of our best players, majority of our best players, like by the end of my second year there, did not want to play there. And a lot of them left. And when you're Rice University, you can't afford to lose your best players every year. Or else, guess what? You're not going to be good. Go figure. Even if you have great coaching. So it's a weird disparity. And I loved all my teammates. It was awesome. And there are a handful of coaches that were amazing there. So I don't want to blanket demonize coaches or individual coaches. But saw a lot of stuff that really sucked.
I think you articulated that in a way that I don't think anyone would hopefully listen to that and feel demonized. Just a random question before I ask you my next one. Have you ever thought about like going into not radio, because radio sort of, I don't even know if it's alive anymore. Like, can we turn on FM 96 whatever right now? I don't know. Have you ever thought about doing any kind of like sports broadcasting, or just because the way you talk, you're a very articulate person, and I feel like you just have like a sports voice, and like people would enjoy listening to you. Have you considered this as like a plan B to personal training at some point?
Well, coming from you, first off, that means a lot. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Honestly, I think that would be something I would love. That's something I would consider. I think I love hearing myself talk. No, but essentially,
that's why the headphones are
it
still
helps,
on.
right? Yeah, exactly. No, but I think I always had a fascination for voices and like speech and stuff, which I think is really cool. Like in terms of, I always loved people that could do impressions or otherwise, or your Jim Carreys and your Robin Williams and people like that. But I think sportscasting would be really cool. I think it would be kind of this weird aspect now, because I have this weird love-hate relationship with sports and kind of the industry. So it would definitely be something I love. Like if you plot me in front of a screen and you had me like, just, hey, start commentating for this football game, that would be something I would enjoy. So worth considering.
Just something I wanted to throw out there.
Thank you.
In case no one's planted that seed before, maybe I'll just plant it, water it a little bit, and maybe it'll grow, maybe it won't.
We'll see.
So in college, what was going on behind the scenes with you?
Yeah, I think for me, if this is okay, I think this would be a great time to kind of give a little bit of like my testimony and story as a whole. Because I think there's a little bit of context. You've heard some of it, but a little bit of context that would be helpful heading into this.
Yeah.
For me, I grew up kind of culturally Christian. And what I mean by culturally Christian is not knowing what it means to be a believer. I kind of felt the convictions of a Christian, but not the hope, not the eternal hope of like the gospel, essentially. So for me, growing up culturally Christian means our family kind of went to church until we didn't, because, NFL's on Sunday and stuff. So we kind of stopped going to church, and there was some church hurt for my parents and stuff, and it just wasn't really a priority. And even though in high school I was a Fellowship of Christian Athlete like leader, I would have, if you would have asked me, I would have said I was a believer, and I genuinely would have thought it, but I actually didn't know what it meant to follow Christ for a long time. And with that in mind,
Real quick.
Yeah.
What was the church hurt that either you or your parents or the whole family experienced? Do you recall?
Yeah. I think just part of their story, it can be kind of a sensitive topic, and by church hurt, it could be anywhere from, my dad had difficult things growing up, and the solution to that was like go to church 6-7 days a week, and
that's
just
a lot
kind
of church.
That's a lot, right? And so, like my dad's biblical knowledge, it's not like that's not there, but I think it comes in combination with kind of the disparity of like, here are the truths of the gospel and Jesus' character, but then like, oh, that is not what I'm witnessing from the church and from people who are from the church and otherwise. And so I think it's very important for anyone that is interested or struggling with their faith in terms of Christianity. I think it's very important that you learn to separate the character of Jesus from the character of Christians. And now, hear me when I say that Christians, especially with each other, should hold each other to like a high accountability. But at the same time, it's very important to note that the church is made up of broken people because we are all broken and we are all sinful. So I think one of the biggest characteristics of a believer should not be self-righteousness, it should be humility. And I would hope that people would be encouraged by that and towards that, because humility is understanding other people's brokenness because you are broken yourself, and we all are. And so with that in mind, it's worth noting that every single church is going to be made up of broken people. That doesn't mean we shouldn't hold churches accountable. That doesn't mean we shouldn't say that, like, we shouldn't let them do whatever. Like, we can critique churches 100%, especially if you're finding a home church. But at the same time, don't let seeing anyone being broken dissuade you from like, oh, well, Christianity is a sham. And that was a lot of kind of what I thought. I kind of held this disparity of like, I'm like, okay, I did the right thing a lot growing up, or tried to, but it wasn't like a sense of morality. It was like this identity that I formed in myself. I'm like, oh, this is the good and right thing. And I wanted to be well behaved, like for my parents. And part of the reason for that was I saw a lot of conflict between some of my parents and my older siblings. And I think my older siblings had gone through so much with their dad having passed away and with everything. So like they, you know, had a couple more, they bumped heads with my parents more when they were in high school. And they weren't bad students. They weren't like misbehaved per se, but they did more rebellious things, I would say. And my younger brother, you know, like wasn't labeled immediately as a great student or something like early on. So they were always on him about like his grades. So like for me, I felt this pressure to be like, okay, behave well, excel well in school. So that, and sports. So that was kind of where my identity was formed. And what that led to is it led to me being a perfectionist. It led to me being a procrastinator, and it led to me never seeking help and just like pretending everything is okay and pretending that I am good, like at all times and like infallible. So that's kind of some of the context heading into college. And a lot of the things that I was pursuing were things that were kind of pressed upon me, but I never really asked myself like what I wanted very much. And so I don't want to blame anyone when it comes to not having that clear goal, but I was just like, hey, I'm either going to be a doctor or an NFL football player. Like that's my plan. It's going to work out. But like I was such a bad procrastinator and actually had signs of depression and anxiety early on in middle school and high school. Like I remember my identity being so caught up in being a good student that there's one project that I procrastinated on because I was worried about doing a good job on it. So I'd put it off. I'd play video games. And usually I would just like, I couldn't get work done until I was so anxious about it that like I had no choice but to start working on it. And that was the only way I could get anything done. Little sneak peek. That is not a good strategy when you go to Rice University. But I couldn't get things done unless like I had no other choice but to do it. And so I would like, and I remember one time I forgot about this project. I just forgot about it. And I was like a straight A student, so the teacher would have been totally chill. But I remember driving to school, my mom driving me to school in middle school, and having what I now know to be a panic attack, but not knowing what it was at the time, like hyperventilating and being like I can't believe I forgot about this, like not saying anything, and then like just broke down in front of my mom, and she was freaked out because I'm normally like this very like level-headed, like calm, does everything like person, And I was just like, heart, just like, I was paralyzed. I didn't know what was going on, and I was freaking out. And I was like, I don't want to go to school today, is what I told my mom. Not that I had forgotten to do a project. I was just like, I don't want to go to school today. And that happened a very select few times, but I didn't have the knowledge to recognize that as early signs. And I guess depression-wise, I was still kind of high functioning, and I leaned heavily into like video games or sports. And, you know, I had idolized things like even the weekend. Like, I would be anxious and stressed all the time, and I would tell myself throughout the whole week, I'm like, I just got to get to the weekend. Just got to get to the weekend, then everything's going to be okay. And I would get to the weekend, and I would numb out on video games. And then I remember it would like be Sunday night and going like, oh my God, like I wasted my weekend. Like, I can't believe I did that. Like this was going to be everything. And I put everything on that pedestal, right? And it's just this constant state of anxiety. Because I had idolized, I had looked to that thing to fulfill me. So heading into college, you know, I leaned heavily into football. Even my first semester actually went well. I had straight A's. I was voted freshman defensive team captain. Like, things were, like, I was content because football was good. Like, I liked my friends. And even though, like, we didn't have a great record that year, like, it was football, and I was succeeding in it, and I was doing fairly well in school. I liked my professors. They were awesome. And everything changed when we had a new coaching staff. And with the new coaching staff, there was the change of everything. There was the incentive for the coaches to get rid of scholarship players so they can recruit their own guys. And on top of that, I was kind of, I guess I'll say manipulated. And again, I don't want to like demonize them, but like within the first week of full pads practice, I was called into the head coach's office, and they asked me to change positions. And being someone who really has an approval idol of other people, of authority figures, I was like, heck yes, like, if whatever you tell me to do, like, I will do. And so I played linebacker my whole life, but I was asked to move to fullback. I was like, heck yeah. But they said, they go, hey, you will start for us this year if you play fullback for us. And I was like, oh, heck yeah. I was like, start my redshirt freshman year? Yeah, let's go, because I redshirted my first year, which means you don't play, and that gives you an extra year of eligibility for college football. And so that would mean, I'm like, I could start for 4 years? That's crazy. That's great for the NFL. You know, those are the thoughts going through my head. And essentially, they brought in a fifth-year senior from the university they were at previously to come start at fullback, which is fine. I was not better than him. I should not have started over him. He had a lot more experience than me. But I can't say if this is 100% true, but from what I understood, like, the linebacker coach is from the previous staff, and he wanted me to be a linebacker. But they moved me out of there, and they brought in their own guy who's a true freshman, and he started at linebacker and maybe shouldn't have at the time. He's a good friend of mine, so he's awesome. I'm not casting shame, but maybe should not have started over some of the other people that were previously on the team. But so that was kind of the first taste. But the weird thing was me kind of like seeking the approval of the coaches. I took that as I failed because they said I would start for them, and I didn't. And so I didn't think for once that the coaches were manipulating me at all. I was just like, oh, like, clearly I'm disappointing them, so I need to step it up. And this is kind of where things started to spiral. Like, not only did school get harder, and I saw mistreatment of some players, my own roommate was told he was a waste of a $365,000 scholarship and that he should leave. He was told those words. I was never told those things directly. I think the coaches liked me for the most part because I did whatever that they said. But at the same time, I was seeing that disparity. And then the only way I could get on the field at my position was that I was willing to kind of like hit harder than like the other player that was there. I was willing to sacrifice my body, and the coaches recognized that. And so they put me in on short yardage goal line. I got to play in some really cool places and stuff. But basically, they would put me in on lead plays, short yardage, goal line, and one of my tasks for one of the plays is literally like leap my body like over our offensive line and defensive line and make no one willing to be in front of me, and the running back would jump over me for like the short yardage and stuff. And so, but with that, there started being jokes about me by the coaches. And that was when things started to kind of spiral as well. Like, for example, I was called like Waterboy, which love the movie. I don't know if you've seen it with Adam Sandler and stuff, but I was called Waterboy because, and I was called like the, what do you call the CTE guy? Because CTE is in reference to the damage to your head, like over time, like the chronic like trauma induced to your head, where you have a lot of negative things that happen later on in life. But basically, all of the jokes are around the fact that if I was willing to sacrifice my body like that, I clearly had a screw loose. Was kind of the jokes behind it. And it might have just been like, hey, it's just football talk or whatever, but that really got to me because when it came to football, I never prided myself in being the biggest, the fastest, the smartest, the strongest, but I always prided myself in like trying to work harder than everyone and trying to like study harder than everyone. And then when my intelligence and my willingness to sacrifice my body was made fun of, it's not like it didn't hurt. It's not like when I was asked to jump over the line of scrimmage and I would take a face mask to my shins every single time. It wasn't like that didn't it didn't hurt. But at the same time, I was essentially kind of being made fun of that or for that. And so in combination with that, school started getting really hard and I didn't have great study habits. And I remember the horrifying feeling for me. It was one of the worst feelings I ever had when in high school I would just stay up late and get things done. I would just be like, I could always make it work out. And I remember studying for this test like 2 days before it was going to happen. And I just stopped and looked at all the stuff that I had to learn. And I go, like, I actually can't do well on this test. And not without sacrificing my performance in football. Because we got up at I had to get up at 4:30 a.m. to get ready to walk to practice and stuff. And so it's it's 2:30 a.m. I got to wake up in 2 hours. And I'm like, I'm not going to do well on this test. And that was a very significant moment for me to be just felt like, wow, my whole world is caving in because this stuff was starting to happen in football. Football was not fun. My first year, I'd say it wasn't easy. It was really tough. But my first year, I still enjoyed aspects of it. But now I stopped enjoying football. I felt like the coaches thought I was a failure. And then now I'm not doing well in school. And my mental health spiraled really fast. And I feel like everything else I was putting off from my parents' divorce and this identity crisis and not being a believer and feeling guilty about things when it comes to faith, but not knowing the joy and hope of being a believer. It led to days of laying in bed five hours straight, not studying, not going to class. The only thing I could do is get myself out of bed for football, and I watched as I went from straight A's to I'm failing, and to be honest, it's divine intervention that I got help at all. I wish I could sit here and just be pridefully, I want to be yeah, I just realized I needed to get help. But no, I just, what happened from there is I actually, before I even knew I had depression, I didn't think I qualified for it. Basically, I reached out to help from my parents. I remember I didn't want to go into details with my dad, but I just said I was really struggling. And he's like, yeah, I really struggled in college when I was partying too much, so I just had to focus up and stuff. He's like, you can do this, son. And I was like, thank you. But also, I wasn't partying or anything. Like, I wanted to do well, but I couldn't. Like, I couldn't function well. And then I talked to my mom, and I was like, Mom, like, I'm, like, I don't know why. I just, like, my willpower's not there. Like, I didn't tell her the full extent because I was afraid to tell her that I had, like, suicidal thoughts and stuff at the time. But I told her, I was like, I'm really struggling. And she's like, you know, like, when my husband passed away, I just had to keep going for the kids, you know? And I was like, well, I definitely don't deserve to feel that way, is what it felt. And I know she said that in a comforting way of, like, you know, if I was able to get through this, you can get through this kind of way. But that made me feel worse because I didn't know why I was depressed, really. Like, I hadn't recognized all these things that were going on in my life. And so when my mom told me about her experience when her husband died, I go like, oh, I haven't had anything traumatic happen to me, is literally what I was thinking. So I'm like, I don't deserve to feel this way. Like, there are people with much harder lives than me. Why do I feel this way? And so I just felt worse and worse and worse. And to be honest, I'll be quick on how this happened, but there was a kickoff where a guy broke his shoulder on my face, and, like, we hit really hard, and I went down. We both went down, and still played the rest of that game, but they got me tested for a concussion because it was a really big hit, even for me, CTE guy. And so I was with the trainer when we were going, and it was like a couple days later, and he took me to the doctor, and I told that trainer, I go, man, I literally said, I hope I have a concussion because, to be honest, I don't know what's going on with me right now, is what I told him. And he told the head trainer, and the head trainer took that as, like, I was skipping practice or something because I'd hope. He goes, you told that trainer that you hoped you were hurt. And I was like, and I got really, really angry. Not something I usually get. But I didn't lash out at him. I just got very emotional. And because I was angry, because it wasn't because I didn't want to do football. It was actually like, I hoped I had a concussion and something was wrong with me because I didn't know why I, you know, was experiencing all these things. And he was the one, after recognizing, like, that I was not doing well, he encouraged, like, he told me to go meet someone that was on campus, like, counselor on campus, and she was amazing. But I remember I went to my first session going, I've got nothing to say, and bless her heart, she stayed late because we went 3 hours straight of me just word vomiting, I guess, everything I had never said. And she immediately diagnosed me with major depressive disorder, and really thankful for her because she eventually encouraged my parents to come with me in person, and she had me leave the room to explain to them kind of where I was at mentally, and which is really helpful because I was so worried about approval from them. I never would have told my parents how bad I was feeling or doing, so she did it for me, which, praise God for that. But yeah, so I, not voluntarily, took a medical withdrawal from Rice University, and that at the time felt like my life was over because I tried to get back into Rice and wasn't accepted back in. COVID happens, so you're locked in a lot. And I worked over the course of the summer, and me being diagnosed with depression and suicidal thoughts and all, like, forcing me to leave that, ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. But at the time, it felt like my life was over. But I got a job at a local gym, which is right next to my old high school. That is where I met my now wife about 5 years ago. She was working a job. She went to UT, but she was working a summer job as a life instructor. I was working behind the desk at the fitness desk. And it was because of her that I came to faith in ways, because on our second date ever, she asked me, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely do you think that you're going to heaven? And I was like,
Second date
yeah,
question.
second date. She doesn't recommend it to other people, but I'm very grateful for it. And I was like a 7. Like I was like, I'm like a 7 or something. That was what I said. And she goes, well, I'm a 10, and here's why. And at first I was like, okay, like good for you. But in reality, she was the first person, or at least the first person where it clicked in my head. I had gone to church. I had like been poured into by a lot of other people. It was the first time someone like laid out the gospel, and she goes, I'm a 10 because I believe that Jesus died and rose to heaven, that he died for our sins. Like period. And my entire life, I had been deeming myself unworthy of God's love and of all of that because of my sinfulness. I was thinking that I had to essentially earn my way to heaven. And so I was in this constant state of anxiety and shame and guilt because I was like, well, I'm not good enough. And I didn't realize that I don't have to be. In fact, I can't be. Like, that's impossible. And that was the first time I realized what the gospel was, that like it was genuinely just believing Jesus is who he says he is. And that was enough, like just committing my life to him, not me being perfect. And that was a part of my identity, like trying to be this perfect person that never messed up, never bothered everyone, never stepped on anyone's toes. And like, that was where a lot of my identity and that disparity of that identity versus how broken I actually was. And that was like my first realization. Now, I can't sit here and say that after that, things have been sunshine and rainbows, but that was a very significant and important realization for a lot of this healing that I have had. And for me to say that I am joyful, that is kind of what it all took. But yeah, I talked about all that stuff, but that's been like the beginning of kind of my faith journey and the things that had to happen to like get me to that very significant point. But yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
first off, for being so transparent. Did I catch you tearing up at one point?
Yeah.
Why?
I think for me, there's still a part of me that still grieves kind of that season. And not to say, I think I have genuinely healed from it a lot, but I think there's still that remnant of how much my identity was tied up in not being a football player per se, but like, I think I put everything I had into that and was kind of like ridiculed for it. And that hurt a lot. I think I remember we had a coaches meeting, and the coaches kind of review everything of like how your last semester did and kind of what their expectations are moving forward. And I will say some of those coaches were super encouraging. Like my strength coaches, this is probably part of the reason I'm in fitness. My strength coaches, my second year, they put us through the worst hell of conditioning you could possibly imagine. I genuinely believe we were probably a top 5 university when it comes to conditioning, because every single one of those days, I don't know if I've had one workout since Rice University that was harder than like those conditioning days. That built some resilience, and I love them because they were awesome. So some people were super encouraging, but with that coaches meeting, I remember one of my coaches said, hey, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you because we were able to take you from linebacker where you were a liability and bring you over to offense where you could actually contribute something. And I remember just being so taken aback that like I didn't realize I was like I'm a liability. Is all I took from that entire meeting, like even though like other coaches gave me good praise and encouragement. And I was like, I was a liability. And I remember probably the only coach I shared anything with, who was my old linebacker coach. He was from the old staff. Love him. Shout out Coach Vestal. You're awesome. He was definitely an advocate for football players. But I remember speaking to him, and I was just like, like liability, like that just like would recycle in my head. And even though it was technically a compliment, I was just like, I was like, my coach, who I look up to so much, like called me like a liability, and I was just, that really got to me. So I think that was one of the reasons I got very emotional. But on top of that, it was also just because I think I have sympathy for myself back then, in that like I didn't have the hope in Christ. And so to have the one thing that I was kind of holding on to when I was like struggling with depression, I was struggling with anxiety, I didn't trust some of the people in my life. Like I was hiding things from people in my life because I wasn't able to be vulnerable enough. So I was in this really low state. And I was like, at least I can just give all of my effort to football. Like I remember a point where I realized I was going to like fail out because I had no will to keep doing school. So I said, as long as I'm here, I'm going to give everything I have to football because I still have that. I like for at least another month or two, I don't have to face the fact that I'm going to fail everything. I can still put, like my best effort on the field. And then I was essentially kind of like, more or less made fun of for that effort, or like the credit for that effort was that. And so for me, that was, that being able to put myself in that position again, like I still feel that very tangibly. And I think one thing that I've been blessed with at the same time is like, in recovery, I actually lead recovery groups now at our church, like going through the steps process. And so I've gotten to be a part of a lot of people's journeys, which has been awesome. It's been really cool to see what Christ is doing. But at the same time, like, man, my sympathy goes out there to, like, when someone talks about depression, it's one thing to have sympathy versus empathy. It's like some people are like, hey, I don't know that experience, but I know that must be really tough. But for me, a lot of times I'm like, man, I know what that feels like. I do know what it feels like to have no willpower to even get out of bed at times, like to like, not want to be here. Like for me, I existed for a time, like when I had suicidal thoughts, I lived because I didn't want to disappoint my family, coaches, and professors by committing suicide, essentially. And so I felt trapped and forced to live, and it felt like living was suffering for a time. And so I may not know someone's exact experience, but I have been in those shoes before. And at the time, I'd be like, God, why, even before I was a believer, I was like, God, why would I suffer through this? Like, why do I feel this way? I don't deserve, well, one, it was like, I don't even deserve to have these negative emotions. Other people go through harder things than me, etc. And now I can confidently say that I'm very lucky to have gone through that. And hopefully people hear me and they don't think that I'm mitigating the fact that they're in depression. And I'm not even saying that they will ever fully understand why, per se, but I am without a doubt confident that I have gone through those things so that I can understand and have sympathy and help other people who are struggling with those similar things. So, yeah, I usually don't get very emotional either. So the fact that like a lot of that brings up stuff like that season, it was just very visceral, and I recall it very clearly. So, yeah.
What were the suicidal thoughts that you were having?
I think like traffic for once was like, I remember I had like these impulses of like, man, it'd be so easy to just turn on to oncoming traffic, but I'm like, oh well, I don't want to affect other people like that way. Or I just, depression can sometimes manifest in a way of like, it's like you're almost in a flight or fight, but you're not doing anything about it. So like essentially you're in this kind of, you feel like you're almost anxious, but like there's nothing triggering it directly. And so you're kind of just in this state of like, I don't want to move anywhere. For me, the shame and guilt of not succeeding, as well as like approval idols from my parents, from my coaches, from my professors. I stopped showing up for class because I didn't want to look in the professors' like faces, like with bad grades, which is not what it's about at all. And I think there would have been some professors that would have been perfectly like caring and kind, but I just felt so much guilt and shame of even like being in their presence and not succeeding. And I felt this pressure of like growing up, I was labeled as like gifted and talented early, and like being smart. And that was part of the reason I didn't get a lot of help or I didn't like tutoring, because I'm like, well, if I'm getting tutoring, I need help, and therefore like I'm not smart, almost is like kind of the thought process, which is super prideful, but at the same time I just felt this pressure to like appear smart or to be smart. And so I felt horrific, or like I was insulting coaches or professors if I was performing poorly. And so like I couldn't face them, and I would avoid them, and I would lean on other things. So yeah, I think some of the suicidal thoughts were just, I felt kind of trapped because I wanted things to end, but I felt guilty for how that would make other people feel. So that was kind of that trapped feeling. And so I would like, anytime I'd have a suicidal thought, I'd be like, no, I can't do that. Like, I can't do that. Like, and yeah, then I'd feel guilty and shameful about having a suicidal thought. It's like, bad. That's not good. And then, so like, yeah, there wasn't, I would just lean on a lot of other comforts from like video games, or like, to be transparent, like porn and masturbation. I had probably a porn addiction for over a decade, and that was a huge source of guilt and shame, because I always identified myself as this like well-behaving person, like this person that tried to do the moral and the right thing. And then I had this part of me that like I was leaning on that so heavily, and there's just this huge disparity. I felt terrible about having done that. So, or like doing that at all. But at the same time, that was like a comfort. That was like a comfort amidst those times, in terms of like approval and like literal comfort. Like I leaned on those things heavily, and it was an addiction. I didn't get help from that for years later, and I never told a soul until like 3 years ago. And in fact, the reason I went to recovery was because I just got engaged with my wife, and I recognized how bad that my struggle with like porn and masturbation was. And I'm like, I need to fix this before I get married, is what I told myself. But in reality, praise God that I went to recovery, because those were not my biggest issues. I thought those were my biggest issues, but those are the symptoms of a lot of other things going on. Like, my biggest issue was not in like porn and masturbation. My biggest issue was all these other things that are going on underneath that were causing me to go to that in response. When I went to recovery, they have 3 main idols of everything that they talk about: approval or significance, they have control, and they have comfort. And I thought by far, I'm like, oh, well, clearly comfort is my issue. I procrastinate on everything. Like, I watch video games. Like I struggle with like porn and masturbation and all that stuff. I thought that was my biggest issue. But in reality, I didn't realize that my biggest issue was in the approval of other people. And usually is my approval idol at the base of most of the decisions that I was making, whether it's my parents, those professors, any figure, my friends and otherwise. Like those were at the base of everything. And if I felt like I was not approving other people, that's when I leaned on comfort idols like social media, video games, movies, porn, masturbation, otherwise. I leaned on all of those things to like comfort my failed approval idol. Yeah, so sorry, little tangent there, but yeah.
No, I was actually just thinking in my head you were stringing that together beautifully, because after you had answered the question about some of the suicidal thoughts that you were having, I was going to ask you to sort of talk to us about then the recovery process from that. So when this episode reaches someone who is currently at the same spot that you were at, we could give them some tools. You could give them some tools for what they could potentially do to get away from those thoughts. So you answered my question without me even having to ask you. So thank you for that. Do you believe today that do you still consider yourself a liability? Is that belief still within you, or do you think you've done some pretty good work around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, to be honest, that is not a one-time thing, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's very easy for my heart to believe a lot of lies about myself or about other people, and so it's more of a constant fight or sanctification. Like, for example, I really struggle with body image when it comes to like pursuit of fitness and stuff. And that is not never an issue anymore. Like, I think my relationship with my body is the best it's ever been. But does that mean that I don't have like these lies come up? Does it mean that I don't have moments that it's like really hard? Like, yes, I think those things still come up. And like, I struggle with an approval idol. It's something I've healed a lot from, and I've been given so much recognition, or like I've been given so much awareness, and I would call that sanctification from the Spirit. Like, God is constantly sanctifying me. But at the same time, those things are still there. So like, me having that fear and that like core part of me thinking like I'm a liability, that can show up. The difference now is that I know promises and I know things that are actually true, and those are things I need to be present and remind myself of, and community is really helpful in reminding me of when I am struggling, because there will be seasons where, spiritually and faithfully, like, are really strong, and there are seasons that are really challenging, and that's kind of the human experience. And it's like, for example, if someone struggles with lust early on, that might be, hey, maybe like porn and masturbation is not a good, healthy thing. But then, let's say you've stopped that, and like, praise God, for years I like haven't looked at porn now, but like, what is the core issue? Like, one of the core issues is lust, and looking to like lust, and in the Bible it says like sinning in your heart should be taken just as seriously as like physically sinning in real life, like cheating on your partner, for example. And so now, what does lust look like for me? It's like, do I ever struggle with lust? It's like, yes. And it's like, I'm not struggling with the same tangible issues as before, but it's like, if I'm scrolling on social media now, it's like, do I look at someone for like 0.1 of a second too long? Like, yes. Can that happen? It's like, yeah. And like, that's still something that I have recognized to be like important, like to repent of, and to to pursue faithfulness, like towards God, and then towards my wife, who I love so much. And so it's like, those are things that now I'm being convicted of, whereas 5 years ago I wasn't being convicted of that, right? So like that's kind of the constant sanctification. So I think those lies are still present in my heart at times, and they come up, like those lies being money's going to make you happy or satisfied, right? It's like that security that money provides will make you happy. And those idols, it's like, hey, if you win this bodybuilding show, like you're going to feel good, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
those are kind of like lies. And it's not to say that there's nothing bad about those things. It's not to say that like being intelligent with your money and saving money and working hard for it, I'm not saying that that's bad. It's just that when you start looking to those things to solve kind of the issues in your life instead of like faith, that has been the biggest thing for me, where it's been very easy to like pursue my identity as a bodybuilder, as a coach, or as a husband, instead of pursuing or like recognizing my identity in Christ, has kind of been the biggest thing for me.
I was going to ask you. We talked off. Went off camera for a few minutes. Sorry, guys. One thing we were talking about was just like having the ability to listen and to focus. One hack that's helped me that I don't know if you've ever utilized in school or whatnot is sometimes when you're talking, there's something I don't want to forget, and I'm like, what if I hold on to? So you'd mentioned, for example, specifically the word liability, and I knew I wanted to ask you a follow-up question about that, but I didn't want the word to escape. But if I'm holding on to liability so hard, then I'm not listening to you as much. So I find that if I just jot my thought down real quick, 95% of the time, not only do I need to not reference it, but if I do need that reference, it's right there. So I don't know for you if it'd be helpful to like carry a, just like a, I don't even want to call this a journal because it's literally just like random shit that I want to remember later.
Yeah.
But it's a helpful trick for, I don't know, you said something about listening or staying, like just ways for you to personally stay focused. I don't know if you've ever tried this when you're coaching people or even at church or recovery meetings, but it's just like this weird hack that for me it just works really well.
I think that's something I can definitely put into practice even more. Now that you mention it, I have an absurd amount of notes on my phone, like different note starts, like some are complete like scratch, and I don't understand what half of them mean anymore. But I definitely will take notes and like even screenshots on my phone. Like my wife gets so annoyed because she's like, "How do you have like 1,000 screenshots on your phone?" I'm like, "Well, it might come up. You never know."
Might come up.
Yeah, like is what I say, and like 90% of the time it doesn't. But yeah, I think that's there's wisdom in that, because I can be very hyperfixated on someone with ADHD and ADD, very hyperfixated on that one thing that like I either want to say or like want to bring up, and that can impair me from hearing someone and actually being there for someone, which especially in recovery, or especially when it comes to my relationship with my wife, like that is something that is critical. And yeah, I've been guilty of not truly listening because I will fixate on those small things. So I think jotting it down, I think that's really wise.
May I ask you a question?
You may, yeah.
While you're on the podcast.
100%.
Let me give that some context why I'm asking permission. I want you and even the audience to know that all the questions I ask are in the frame of, could this help one of the listeners? So even like go back an hour and a half ago when I was asking you about your parents' divorce, you put up sort of a caveat that, I'm not trying to paint my parents in a bad light, and I was not trying to put them in a bad light. It's more of a, how can we go through your own life experiences to help someone else who's listening that's maybe 6 years behind you and going through it right now. So in that context, I'm curious. I've noticed that when I'm talking, you do a really good job at making eye contact, and when you're talking, you're almost like searching throughout the room. Is that a tactic that you use to stay focused, or when you're talking, where do your eyes go, or where does your mind go?
Good question. I would like to think that my eyes on you when you're listening is mostly a thing out of respect, so that you feel heard, and hopefully that I'm listening as well. I think with my eyes kind of looking around, part of it is, I think, it just a habit that I have. Maybe I look like I'm pondering, but
Looking for that approval.
yes.
If I move my eyes around, I'll look smarter, and then they will admire me, and it will check
Exactly.
off that box.
I wouldn't count myself. I think that is definitely something like, because to be honest, I do, approval idol is something I struggle with the most. And so genuinely wanting to sound smart to others or wanting to sound put together, I've been hyper aware of me trying not to say during this because of my professor at Rice University when we filmed ourselves and analyzed how we gave speeches. Like, those are things, I mean, that's what, like 6+ years ago, but still very affected by that. So I think the fact of the matter is, whether I like it or not, a lot of my stuff is from kind of that approval motivation, and some of it's habit. Like, I don't think it's necessarily bad for, I'm not super concerned with what my eyes are doing kind of while I'm speaking, but man, from a young age, I was always worried about a lot of things. So like most of my decisions was based off how could other people view me better. And if someone had a bad opinion of me, man, that really, really got to me. Even though, like, you know, biblically, we should only be concerned with the approval of God and not of man. But here I am, right? So like hyper aware of things like, you know, whether it was my body image from a young age, and like what I looked like or my behavior, how well I was regarded. Those motivated most of my decisions. So I wouldn't put it past me if that is the main motivation of what I do with my eyes or hands or, you know, so.
The robot.
But yeah, exactly.
The thing I'm getting more and more aware of because I listen to all these episodes from start to finish before they go out, for better or for worse. I do it for a few reasons. One, I handwrite all the chapters, so I go in there and put that at 32 minutes and 41 seconds. We talked about Roy and at an hour and 3 minutes, so all that stuff. And I've become more aware of my ums. And that is an area where I need to allow myself a little grace, because every time David hears David say he gets very upset and starts doing crazy stuff, like talking in the third person in front of Randall, who's only known him for 2 hours, coming off like a psycho. I just did it again.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, definitely have some grace, because I remember how hard it was, and I don't envy you going back over and listening not only to your own voice, but having to hear the likes or the ums and all that stuff. I remember for that class, it was -2 points for every like or
That'll teach you quick.
Oh yeah, real quick. And like they filmed you so you could go back and watch it and see how you moved and how, you know, you controlled and stuff. And I think that was it was actually a really good class, and one of my favorite professors, she actually taught us super practical things, like things of, she was like the debate coach, but she was also like internationally ranked in like speaking off top of your head, improv, I guess, improv, like speeching about particular topics. And so she was incredible in that. And she taught practical things like how to give a speech at a wedding versus a eulogy, and some really cool stuff when it came to advertising. That was one of the first classes I ever took. I'm like, this is applicable to my life. And I can't say the same for like all of my high school stuff, which, you know, that comes with the structure of how school is designed, not an issue with teachers. But yeah, so that was pretty cool.
If I start listening to it in the context of every time I say one listener clicks off, maybe that will improve my own use of filler words.
Yeah.
Because that's devastating, even more so than a grade. Grade is one thing. Unless it's the final exam, you always got more homework coming up. You got extra credit. I just said it again. There goes another listener.
Yeah.
That is a good hack, actually. I might actually use that as a
fear tactic.
As like, be it healthy or not. I think it is. Going back to before we took our break to sort of bring it full circle, and then I want to go into your bodybuilding life a little bit if we have time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
Just this morning, I wasn't planning on admitting this, but as part of I have two different rituals I sort of go through pre-podcast. One is very gym related, if it's an afternoon or evening episode and I can make the time to go to the gym. For a 12:30 episode, I don't have the time. I end up just staying home, and part of my ritual is just to do something that's very relaxing for me, to get in as relaxed a state as possible. So for this morning, I cooked myself breakfast while watching an episode of one of my favorite shows. And there is this scene where a father was talking about his wife that had passed away and why she made her son biscuits and went through this process. And it was just this really sweet story. And I do not cry at TV. I'm not saying that as like, I'm a man, I don't cry. I cry, but battery exhausted again. I'll fix that in a second. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. That's what happens when cameras go down.
TV.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it just hit me, and I think it was because the father was telling a story about his wife, his wife who had passed away, and his son and her son's relationship before she had passed. And my mom's out in California, and in that moment, that story made me really miss my mom. And I didn't start crying. It was more teared up, shed one tear. And I was like, man, I really wish I could be in California and not Texas right now. And then to your point earlier about feeling trapped, I just renewed my lease on this place, and that lease hasn't even started yet. So I was in that same moment where here I am cooking and watching TV, two things that are supposed to put me in a really relaxed state. And instead I'm now like, I'm here for 15 months minimum, so I can't even go home if I want to. So the full circle that I was referencing is that when I asked you about if you still feel like a liability, even from someone who's not very religious, I have those moments as well where I'm just like, one of those lies or doubts or fears comes into my head when I was objectively not doing anything wrong, right? I was not engaging in any type of negative behavior. I was actually doing the opposite. But you just have these moments where this moment of doubt gets in your head. I'm like, why am I in Texas doing a podcast when I should be home with my family? Like, this is insane behavior right now. But then you show up, we get to recording, that thought is completely out of my mind. It's not bothering me anymore. I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And yeah, what's your so one, that's a long-winded way of me saying I can relate to how you still have those moments where you feel like a liability. For you, how do you then, do you have any kind of like tactics to shift away from that lie?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
And please keep talking while I move this real quick.
Yeah, no worries. I think that's a fantastic question. And I think it's especially relevant when it comes to, for example, depression, because one of the traits of depression, or at least how it manifests in me, is when you become very, like, it causes you to ruminate. And particularly it causes you to ruminate on yourself and kind of all of the negative things that are going on. So essentially, do I have ways of kind of navigating that, like when those thoughts are brought up? For me, a lot of it is like scripturally, like knowing a lot of scripture about reminders of who God says that I am. Being like an image bearer first and foremost, like the biggest trait and the highest thing of value that I have is the fact that I'm an image bearer rather than, I'm an image bearer first and I'm a believer first, not that I'm a husband first, not that I'm a coach first, not that I'm a bodybuilder first. And the reason I bring that up is, if you think about it this way, I had to, it was really hard on me when, a client of mine left and I felt like I could not help them. And I felt really bad about that. And even though there might have been some ways that I could have handled that, like there might have been ways where I could have been a slightly more optimal coach. But at the end of the day, like, I could not control some of the decisions that client was making for them to potentially not get the results that they wanted. If you create a plan, you create a diet plan, and you encourage them to the best of your ability, and they don't follow those things, there's a certain degree of like, yes, I want to take responsibility for maybe the ways in which I wasn't optimal, but at the same time, I need to have grace for myself, because the lies that I believed in those moments, like when that client left, they didn't get the results they wanted. They said, I'm a terrible coach. I should have worded things differently. I should have worded things more intelligently or more like encouragingly. I should have done more. And I have this insecurity of worrying about not working hard enough. Like, and part of that is because I never finished school. I failed out of Rice, and y'all know all the reasons I explained why that happened, and that ended up being a great thing. But I have this insecurity of like, you can't finish what you started. You're not smart enough, or you are smart enough, but you're not willing to put in the work to get things done. And it's developed this fear that I have of not doing enough, so I can end up being a workaholic in a lot of contexts because of this fear, because of this insecurity of not working hard enough. And a lot of that comes with the hurts from not finishing school, from procrastinating a lot and feeling guilty about that. So in those moments when I feel like I am not enough, when I have those fears, when I worry about not being able to provide for my family, like all of those fears are there, but that's when it becomes really important for me to remember that my values in being an image bearer, that God has provided for me in each and every way, in very tangible ways. Like, I wish I could sit here and just say, when I was younger, I was like, God, if you're real, like, lightning bolt now. And then, like, it didn't happen. I'm like, come on, But I have seen, I think, the further along in faith that I've gotten and the more scripture that has been, like, on my heart, the more aware I've been at his, like, intervention. And I'm not sitting here saying, like in a way of, like, being, like, a prophet or something, but just the awareness of, like, how he's moved in my life, and that I genuinely don't really believe in coincidences at this point. Like, when I literally say praise God, I mean it, like, in those offhanded ways. And, like, one example for me was there was a moment in time where I was very stressed. I was a believer, but I was pursuing engagement with my wife, because I remember it was so scary. She came to me and she was like, hey, we've been dating for like 2.5 years, I think at that point. She was like, I feel like we need to start taking steps towards engagement. And I was terrified. I was terrified, not because I didn't want to marry her. I knew I wanted to marry her. I was terrified because I had all these expectations of what a husband, what a future Randall would be. I was like, well, financially stable, like a really, really strong believer. I don't even know what that means. Right. But like, I had all these visions of what I would be. And so, like, I wanted to marry her, but she was like, we should take steps towards engagement right now. And I was like, I'm working at Amy's Ice Cream. Like, I'm like, which awesome job. But I was like terrified because I'm like, I'm nowhere near ready for that. And so I started working, because I worked at a gym, which was actually a bad experience. And I was like, oh
no,
that
makes me sad.
Big box gym. Part of it is because I didn't advocate for myself, approval, all that stuff. I'm bringing it back together. Essentially, that was a really difficult season. I was working at Amy's Ice Cream and door dashing at the same time and looking into personal training, like, on my own. And I was looking at all those things. I was trying to save money. And I remember trying to take steps towards engagement and be like, okay, I don't have to be, like, super wealthy to actually pursue this, but I'm really scared. I don't even have money for an engagement ring right now. How are we going to sort through this? My dad's not going to support this, or me making this decision to do it because it doesn't make sense financially. And so I was trying to take a step in faith and trust that God was going to provide. But I was not. I was just like, I need more money. I need to work harder, etc. And I remember I met with a friend of mine, and this friend of mine was he was asking for money to go to another country, like to serve and like spread the gospel and stuff. And I remember the whole conversation thinking, there's no way I'm giving this guy money. Not because I don't want to support him. I was like, there's no way. But like in my head, I was like, I'm barely making money. I'm trying to save for an engagement ring. I don't know where I'm going to live next year. Like there's no way I can give this guy money. And so I told him after we had talked, and it was a great conversation. I really wanted to support him, but I was like, I'm not going to lie. Like I go, look, I will pray about it, but to be honest, I don't know if I can like support, like to be completely honest, because of X, Y, Z. And so I remember literally walking away from that conversation. I had just joined Level Up Physiques, which I'm a part of, right? Like literally last week. And as I walked to my car after I just told him, look, I'm not going to have that money. I go to open my car and I get a call from my boss and he's like, hey, you ready for your first client? And I was like, And I was immediately convicted because, like, for me, that was like a telltale sign of like, okay, like God is actually encouraging me. And I gave to him, and he's and he's fully supported, which is fantastic. And that was years ago. And so, point being, like, if I was younger in my faith, I would have thought, oh, pure coincidence. And I'm not here to debate theology on like what is a coincidence or what isn't, but if that moved me to action to support him and God continued to provide for me, then it is definitely divine intervention for me. Whether or not you determine that to be divine intervention, that is up to your own interpretation. But for me, like, that was very clearly a sign from him, and a sign that I needed to lean on him instead of leaning on my own ability to make money and all these things. So, you asked, like, are there ways I navigate that? I think scripture of, like, defining what is true in that and knowing where my identity and value is versus all these idols, which, my identity is not in being a husband. It's not in being a good person. It's not in being a coach. It's not in being a bodybuilder. Even though those are things that compete for my heart's attention all the time.
So you've given us some clues of you've left Rice University, and I'm trying to think about if you said what sort of happened after that. Is that when you were talking about how you met? This is around the same time you met your girlfriend, or your now wife.
Now wife, yeah.
And at the time, she was just a colleague, we could call her, I guess.
Yep.
And did we talk about this, or what happened immediately following after you left Rice?
No.
What happened?
I met her at the gym I was working out over the summer, but I fully intended on pursuing school. Going back to Rice and playing football. It was hard to imagine not doing that. And then I didn't get accepted back into Rice. And then I was like, oh, okay. Life, like, and so I just became a believer for the first time. And so my next thought was, okay, well, my girlfriend goes to UT. My older brother lives in Austin. I grew up being a UT fan my whole life. So my next phase was, I'm going to try to get into UT, and I'm going to walk on and play football at UT. That was my goal. And so I kept training for that and pursuing that. But then, I think as I was pursuing UT, I was actually given, because of all the brokenness I saw in football, praise God, kind of gave me the discernment of like, you know what? I actually don't think football is the wise thing for me to pursue because of all these reasons and how much my identity was caught up in it. And so I decided not to pursue football and just to try to get back into Rice. I was going to HCC at the time, and then I moved to Austin and took some courses at ACC with the intention of getting into UT. I didn't get into UT the first time, and that really bothered me. And my dad was helping me pay for going to UT, so I felt guilty, or like living in Austin. my girlfriend at the time messaged a group chat for everyone that went to the church at the Austin Stone, and it's like, does anyone need a roommate in Austin? And so random guys, had no idea who they were. I roomed with them. They accepted me like they needed another guy. Most of them, all of them were at my wedding. Some of them were my groomsmen. You know, they're some of my best friends now. But at the time, they're like, who's this weird jock that's like coming? And I'm so thankful for them because they encouraged me so much to go to church, which despite becoming a believer was still really hard. I had a big distrust like for church because of some of the disparities. And then like I was looking at the church from a cultural lens and looking at the Bible from a cultural lens instead of looking at culture from a biblical lens. And that was really kept me from pursuing Christ in the church really hard because I would see this pain and I would see this brokenness and I would see something that I would determine to be unloving and go, well, like, and that just kept me away from the church. But yeah, so I was living in Austin, and to be honest, when I didn't get into UT, that really took, like, not getting into Rice, part of me was like, okay, I don't have to practice anymore, which like score. But like there was a part of me that was like, that life was horrible. I remember days where it was like, you know, you get up, you start your conditioning at 6 a.m. So I was up at like 5 a.m. or 4:45 a.m., walk to the stadium, you condition, you shower, you eat breakfast, you sweat because you're in Houston, just walk into class. You go to class, you get lunch, you go to class, you go to football, like you watch film, you get treatment, you practice, you go shower, you study, you go to bed. And that was most days. And probably with limited sleep. So part of me was excited to be away from that. But to be honest, this is when COVID hit. And when I didn't get into UT for the first time, I already didn't have great study habits, but I got super discouraged and super depressed. And so I started, like, not taking the classes seriously. And then I felt horrible because I'm like, wait, is there a chance that you're not going to get an A at an ACC class when you went to Rice? Like, and again, it's that lie in my heart, that lie of like, man, you're supposed to be smart and you're struggling with this. And I had this very like negative, like self-talk and otherwise. And I got super depressed with COVID because there was no in-person there. And I really struggled with the online in terms of accountability and school. And man, I was just really struggling. And this is around the time where I started pursuing fitness. And I knew I loved training. I realized because when I worked at my job, I coached kids at Parisi Speed School, and I really loved that. And I loved working out towards something. And now I wasn't training for football anymore, so I was like, oh my gosh, I need something else. And so I debated strongman, bodybuilding, yes, even CrossFit. I know, but I think CrossFit at a high level is actually fantastic, but I think
I do too.
CrossFit at the beginner level is really dumb.
I will always make fun of them publicly,
yes.
but I know some very healthy people that are avid CrossFitters. So
yes,
yeah.
As I compete in a niche sport, I'm not going to demonize other niche sports.
Right.
But so I debated strongman, like all that stuff interested me. Ended up going the bodybuilding route, but man, like that was kind of becoming my new idol a bit. Like in terms of, you know, for a long time, at the beginning, it was hard to get into the gym because I was so hyper concerned of where I wasn't. I wasn't super consistent. Like prior, when it came to like Rice, I was in best shape of my life trying to get back to Rice. I love that training, but man, when that stopped and I didn't have direct motivation, it was really hard for me with no motivation to like get into the gym. And then when I had the goal of bodybuilding or started having that goal, I was so hyper fixated on where I wasn't that it was really hard for me to get to the gym. Plus you had COVID, like wasn't a great time for gym going. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about that mindset and your routines and habits that you mentioned earlier, you know, my dad had a bench press in his garage when I was in Houston. I was like, oh, COVID, it's going to be super easy. I'm just going to get up off the couch and go in there.
Back to the OG workout routine.
Exactly. But that was actually really hard. Ironically, like you think, oh, yeah, I've got this stuff right here. It's so convenient. It's going to be great. But I think there was something about the mindset of like going to a gym, like you're in that mindset and routine of like, this is where you put in work, which is really hard when you're like on the couch for like 8 hours in a row. And then you're like, all right, I'm going to get up and work out now.
Right.
And so I really struggle with motivation. And when it comes to discipline is not about willpower at all. Like discipline is like developing the habit long enough so that you can take your emotions out of it and keep putting in the work. Like a lot of people think that, and I do love training. I do love it. But at the same time, like I'm not looking forward to leg day every single week. I'm not like, oh, I can't count in the days. Like I'm not. And so like some people are surprised when I tell them, like, yeah, I really didn't want to work out today. They're like, isn't that what you do? And it's like, well, yeah, but I do it because I'm disciplined and I have this goal. And the discipline is not willpower. It's like I've created this habit to where it's not an option anymore. Yeah. But before I had that habit, I would be like, okay, I'm going to train 5 days a week. And then the first 2 days of the week, I didn't work out because I was like, well, I don't have to work out today. I'll work out this evening. And then like you get to this evening, you're like, oh, well, you know, like things came up during COVID. But like things came up. And so point being, you have to just kind of make yourself do it at first if this is something that's important to you, whatever the goal might be. Establishing those habits is really important. You got to take the emotions out of it because if you give yourself slack and you're like, yeah, I might work out today, the probability of doing it is much lower than you're like, I'm working out at this time to this time today. You know, like, and it's not the end of the world if you miss a workout day. In fact, it's not a bad thing. But at the same time, when it comes to consistency, I'm not saying like train if something horrible has happened, but at the same time, I'm saying like you want to take your emotions out of it or else the work's not going to get done. Or at least that's what I've observed for me. And that's why it's been like for the last 3.5 to 4 years, I would say 3.5 years, I haven't gone a week without training at least 5 or 6 times a week, aside from my honeymoon, which was hard because I idolized fitness and I felt bad when I was on my honeymoon and not training. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I am idolizing this still. But so we go back to Austin. I was in Austin at this time and I started leaning on fitness a lot. Because I started pursuing bodybuilding. I was excited. I had something to put a lot of effort towards, but that was like kind of the only thing I was putting a lot of efforts towards because school was really bad. And I remember there was a really dark time where 2 things were going on. One, like I was really depressed kind of all the time. I was leaning on fitness and like achieving a better physique to fulfill me. And as we've learned, any idol like that I've pursued other than God has fallen on its face in front of me and not fulfilled me. And not only that, 2 nails went through the bottom of my foot when I was helping clear my older brother's garage burnt down during one of those dry summers. And I was helping him clear the stuff, and I stepped on a piece of wood that disintegrated, and below it were 2 nails. And so like I had nails go through the bottom of my foot. So this is why I said 3.5 years I've worked out every 5 to 6 days, because for a time I couldn't work out for a few weeks. Well, not really. And that was a dark time because at the same time that was going on, when fitness, kind of like what football used to be for me, I was leaning on fitness and my training and optimizing that to give me this sense of purpose. I was kind of hoping that school would work out, that UT would just let me in, that I didn't get in before because they were full. And I'm like, well, I went to Rice, like my grades at the time were good. Most of my Fs were taken away because I took the medical withdrawal, so like I should get into UT. And I was hoping that these ACC scores wouldn't count because I didn't submit anything. It was just like my previous scores from HCC and Rice. So instead of just being a logical person and like dropping all these classes and instead of failing them, I was so worried about like my dad knowing any of it at all that I just lied to my dad about how school was going. And I'm just like, just let me get into UT and things will be fine. I didn't get into UT. So I was kind of almost bedridden in terms of like my foot. I couldn't really walk that much. It was COVID. My wife, girlfriend at the time, was very frustrated with just how depressed I was, which not criticizing her in this way. It was just like, it was really hard for her to see me like that. And she was frustrated because it felt like from her perspective, and we've talked about this, from her perspective, it felt like I wasn't like trying to get better, which is something that's very common with depression. Like outside looking in, it seems like they're not trying. And in fact, I mean, it's hard to like, how do you progress, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to show those tangible lines and tangible ways. And I was so, as an approval person, my dad is someone who I struggle with approval-wise the most to this day. And a lot of that comes from like the idolization of like football from a young age and all this other stuff. So I had to tell my dad he was paying for me to go to Austin, which I felt bad about anyway. I felt super guilty about, which he was happy to provide. But I had to tell my dad that I failed these classes. And then I ended up making the decision that I was going to pursue personal training full-time without pursuing school anymore. And that was one of the most terrifying moments for me. That was a really dark period of time. And this is after coming to faith. So it wasn't like I came to faith and then I'm happy-go-lucky from here on out. This was a new low point because I believed in God, and I was like, well, God, why do I feel so bad now? Like I know I'm called to be hopeful, but I feel horrible. Like I'm suffering so much. And now like my relationship's in jeopardy because she's really frustrated, and like that was probably a low point of our relationship ever. Like I felt like I had no energy to give towards it, even though I cared about it so much. And I just hit this new low, and I was like, man, I thought things would be better. Like when I became a believer, I kind of like assumed that things would be a net positive from here on out.
Sure.
And that wasn't what I was experiencing. And
how'd your dad take that news?
He actually took it very graciously in terms of like what happened, but was not in support of not pursuing school. He was kind of just like, well, what are you gonna do with your life, basically, like and he did not advise that I not pursue school anymore, but he's like, you have to go to school, you have to figure this out, like why would you not finish school, like why would you not do the ACC courses, and like kind of that other part is like, you're smart, like well, how could you not do this? And there's this weird thing with my parents. They were very supportive, but at the same time, I think there was a disconnect between understanding depression. My mom understands it a lot in the traumatic sense of like what she's experienced, and she genuinely has experienced a lot of difficult things. But so my parents tended to like walk on eggshells around me. It's like, oh, this is a depression thing. And that's not something I hold against them. That's just something that was really hard because I felt like my parents didn't really understand it, and therefore they kind of walked on eggshells around me about those topics. So like I could feel my dad not wanting to say something that could potentially be offensive or something like for fear of
making the depression worse.
Yeah. And that felt bad because then I felt like I wasn't even like truly known, which again, not blaming them for, but it was like that was a hard disparity. And, I felt called to pursue personal training when my personal training at Gold's wasn't even like a great experience like prior.
This was in 2020?
This was 2021, I think, maybe 2022, 2021
So
period.
did you ever end up going back to school?
No. So
Did you get licensed?
yes. So I got my personal training certificate prior to that. Kind of in the meantime, I said, hey, I wanted to work as a personal trainer while pursuing school, which is originally what I did. So I didn't think I was going to personal train full time. But eventually I felt a calling to kind of pursue that. And like I felt encouraged. This is something that I wanted to do. I was debating between that and honestly being like a football coach. Ironically, like I really wanted to be a football coach because I wanted to treat kids differently than kind of how I was treated in a lot of contexts. But I realized okay, that's noble, but at the same time, I don't think I liked football enough to. I discerned that that was not a good enough reason to pursue football. It's like, oh, you hate the system, so you're going to be a part of it to like try to change it from the inside out. Like that's cool and stuff, but I don't think that life would have been I don't think that would have been good because the amount of time that coaches have to put in is really hard on family. And having a dad that worked a lot of hours, I think for me, something that's going to be very important moving, like for me personally, is not working an insane, like a high amount of hours in the future. Or like right now, I've been very blessed with kind of how work, not to, discuss too much work because it's very easy for me to think about work 24/7 if I let it. But with the boundaries that I have, I'm very blessed to pursue the career that I do now. But yeah, in Austin, my dad took it relatively well. And I think he was gracious in a lot of ways, but he was also hurt and he really wanted me to go to UT. And so that was a new low point at the time. But things really started looking up kind of after, I guess the next 6 months to a year after that, things started getting aligning well. And part of that was pursuing engagement with my wife after all of that context and stuff, really struggling with money and now being on my own and stuff financially. That was why that insecurity was there too, when my wife was like, we should take steps towards engagement. I'm like, oh gosh. And so, but after that, like God was super gracious in provision, not just in community, which I really struggled with, but also in, like, my wife was incredible, my friends are incredible, and then like the opportunities that I got for my job, like the job that I have currently is only because I made friends with a guy who went to my church that met me at a Gold's Gym, and he was like, I worked out with him today. No kidding. And when I first met him, it was like 3 years ago, he just kindly came up to me. He's like, you have a great physique. I was like, oh, thank you. Like that
you
means...
do.
I appreciate that. And that meant a lot. He was just very kind, and we talked. Like, we worked out at the gym together, and then we talked about faith for like an hour after that. And he goes, hey, I have a coach. I have a personal training coach that I'd like you to meet. And we do this group workout thing. You should come join it. And I was like, okay. And in my head, I was like, I like training on my own. But I was like, okay, all right, I'll do that. Whatever. And I was looking for personal training opportunities at the time, but that was just, I'll go work out with him. And that was Tyler Fluitt, who is the owner of Level Up Physiques, and he was his coach. And we worked out together, and he's like, you've got experience. Are you a personal trainer? I was like, yeah. He goes, well, he's like, I like how you train. He's like, you're a pretty knowledgeable guy. He's like, are you looking for a job? And I was like, yes, yes. I said it more coolly than that, but I was
No, that's exactly how you said it.
yeah. And so we had an interview, and that is what I do for a living right now. And I never thought I'd be able to pursue this full time, and like be able to serve people well, not have insane prices like for people, and actually do this like sustainably. So that's been an incredible blessing. So I think like all things started really lining up between community, like feeling like Austin is home, pursuing relationship with, like pursuing marriage with my wife, getting involved in the church, having our Bible study community, getting a job, and then my family being in Austin, like aside from my mom and dad, like all my siblings eventually ending up in Austin, like all of that was like came together. And yeah, it's been really cool to see where God has placed me, because then it was like, okay, God, like I wanted to do bodybuilding. Now you've convicted me of like kind of the dark sides and the idolatry of bodybuilding. Can I even be a believer and bodybuild? Like, is that something that can even be done faithfully? And the answer is yes, but it took me some discernment and some time to figure out kind of what that looks like.
Wow. So let me sum this up real quick.
Go ahead.
We got this boy from Houston, was playing football by his first grade year, which led to another 14-ish years. Let's just say that fast math is accurate, give or take, of playing football, which ultimately led to you putting a lot of pressure on yourself, but also like a very high pressure environment. Drops out of school, sort of finds his faith in his own way, gets married, gets certified, lands his job. Life is looking better. How do you feel now? How do you feel right now today about life?
I think, man, and not to say that this is like a constant feeling. I still struggle with depression, anxiety, and like all these little things, right? But I feel like content is a really good word.
Good.
And that's been something I would not have been able to say even like 2 years ago. I think content with a lot of things. I think right now, like this season, like this particular season, what I've been being taught by God in particular has been my limitations. That limitations are okay, but also like how limited I am, as well as I think just patience with things. But like in regards to my limitations, you know, I spread myself too thin a lot of times. And it's because I may genuinely want to serve someone or do this thing by volunteering my time and my effort. I may genuinely want to do those things and be willing to do those things, but I can't always do those things. And as someone with an approval idol, I will sometimes like put things aside and my own priorities aside to like try to do something for someone. And I wasn't made aware of that until it started affecting other people. And what I mean by that is, first and foremost, my wife. I had this thought and fear always of like, hey, you're not working hard enough, work harder. And, you know, I would say a lot of male influences in my life were workaholics. And so I had this pressure that like I need to provide, I need to work hard. You know, my first Gold's job, the reason why it sucked was not necessarily like my boss's fault per se, but I didn't advocate for myself. They were like, hey, like, you know, you need clients, right? I'm like, yeah, I need clients. And it's like, so like what hours are you available? I'm like, yes. And so like whenever there was a possible client available, I would be like, yes. And so I'd have a client at 6 a.m. I'd have a client at like 5 and 6 p.m. And I would work the desk in the middle of the day and I would train there. So I basically lived at the gym.
I remember those days. Yep.
And you would get so burnout, especially with Golds in particular. You know, it would have the same songs queued at the same time of day and stuff.
Lord.
So I felt like Groundhog Day, like going crazy. But I got burnt out really fast. And thankfully, I was able to recognize that it wasn't personal training itself. It was just the structure and me not advocating for myself for those hours and protecting my time. That's the big thing this season, protecting my rest, my time, and knowing my limitations. I am not serving someone well if I tell them I want to help them and I can't. That's really important for me. I took on too many in-person, like majority of my clientele are online, which if you would ask me 2 years ago, I don't even know what like online training is. It's been awesome, but majority are online, and then I had in-person training. I didn't realize I was training too many people in person until I was training too many people in person. And what I mean by that is like it was really impacting other aspects of my life. Particularly, I wasn't able to spend a lot of quality time with my wife. I live with my wife. I assumed I was going to have a lot of time with her, but our schedules didn't align super well. And if I really cared about our marriage, like I needed to make sure that work was not coming first. And with my line of work, with all my online clients, I have roughly a little over 30 online clients and probably about 7 in person right now. And with that in mind, my clients can message me at any time of day. My job is special, and it's great in that like I can kind of schedule my own hours more or less. But on the dark side of that, I can be thinking about my clients 24/7 if I don't respect the time that I'm spending with other people. And as someone who struggles with procrastination and as someone who struggles with getting work done, like, but that I also have this fear that I need to work, I feel like if a client messages me at 8 p.m., like 7 p.m. and I'm on a date with my wife, it's like, I'm like anxious. I'm like, oh, I need to respond to them because I need to be a good coach. But
You should turn those push notifications off.
100%. So like I had to learn how to set boundaries, right? And like set boundaries not just for my own sake, but like for the sake of pursuing friendships and family. And like, you know, I was going a long time without seeing close friends like that lived in the same city as me. I'm like, wow, I just went 4 months without seeing one of my best friends. Like, do I value the relationship with them? And it's like, yes, I do. And so I need to make time for that. And so work can't be my number one. Bodybuilding can't be my number one. And so I have to learn my own limitations. How can I serve my clients really well while also serving my wife well, while also serving my community well, my family? My siblings and stuff, like all of those things are something that I value, and I can't put everything into those things. Like they can't, like bodybuilding should never come before my wife, and neither should work. That doesn't mean she can't be flexible and like support me in some ways, but at the same time, you know, there are boundaries that need to be made, and then I need to protect my rest, because my job, I can work all 7 days of the week if I let myself. And I remember thinking about, you know, my clients are like, hey, do you work this time? And my instinct is to be like, I can be flexible and make that work, because I had this imparted into me by an old boss of like, you want clients, right? Like, and so I had this habit of bending over backwards to make things work for clients. And God has blessed me by putting me in a position where I straight up could not take on more clients without it severely impacting my life. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm stretched a bit thin. And my rest was bad. Like the energy I had to pursue other things was poor. And so it doesn't mean I am bad at my job because I'm not willing to take on more clients. And that was something I had to learn, and thankfully, hopefully, have learned well. So that was a big thing. And like, how amazing of a position am I in to where like I was so worried about provision, and God has put me in a position to where like I can refuse clients and that not be a bad thing. Like that is such a privilege compared to where I was like 3 years ago of like, God, how in the heck is any of this going to work? And so I need to recognize those blessings when they're there. And like how many answered prayers, because it's so easy to like ask for God in those moments, like God, like provide money, like help with this, my relationship, blah, 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 et cetera, all these things, help us get married, like all these millions of prayers. And then for all of it to happen and be like, I did it. And it's like that's not where the credit should go, right? And it's like, so I should be gracious and humble because of those things that have been provided for me, and not to discount like any, like your own work and stuff, but at the same time of like being, man, all of those incredible things that have happened to get me to here to talking on this podcast, I cannot take credit for any of those things. Like there are like, yeah, it's just been incredible to get this opportunity and like all the opportunities that I have right now. So you ask how I've been and like content, I think I am content if I remember kind of all of these things that I've been given, and I am discontent when I forget those things, and when I forget that like I was at Rice at this low point, that I was in Austin at that low point. Like it's very easy to forget all that God has done for me since those moments when I've been graced and blessed, and then I give myself the credit and be like, yeah, I mean, I've worked hard. I've kind of deserved this, you know, and that's when I become discontent. So yeah, those things are really important, and even today, recounting all that is a good reminder for me.
We obviously can't tell the future, but I think you seem like someone who is probably somewhat forward thinking, or at least you seem like you are right now. As you think about the next, 6 months, year, 10 years, even maybe, what do you see? Where do you see your life going?
Great question. I think one thing that's very clear, or has been clear, has been that we love Austin. So in the foreseeable future, I definitely see myself staying in Austin. I love my job. I definitely want to pursue it wholeheartedly. And my wife just got a new job at our church. She's a program manager for the students ministry of the Austin Stone, which is awesome. And she's really good at her job. So for the next 6 months to a year, personally, I want to serve my clientele well. Like there's an incentive, of course, like to get more clients, but I think my priority is making sure that before I get a lot of clients, that I can actually serve the clients that I have well and help them achieve in a lot of ways. I want to pursue friendships. It can be really hard. It can be really easy to get caught up in life. So I want to pursue relationships with my friends and family, and hope that I do that. I've been very honored that one of my best friends, who has seen, this is wild, of all of our roommates, I think like he has been roommates with 6 people who have gotten married, which is crazy. Like at our age, I mean, I'm 26 and he's 24, 25. And I think, yeah, or no, he just turned 23. Lorenzo, I apologize. And so point being, he's seen that many people get married, which is nuts. But one thing that he's given us credit for, and that he has said to me, is that he really appreciates that. He feels like his relationship with myself and my wife has gotten closer as opposed to further away since I've gotten married, which has happened to some other friendships that he's had. And that can be really hard for someone that is single to have a close friend get married and then just kind of be with their spouse for forever. And so I've been very grateful to that, and I hope that we still provide the space for that. And then on top of that, selfishly, I want to excel in bodybuilding. Been pursuing natural bodybuilding for a while now.
When your next, you got another show or competition
I'm
lined
5
up?
weeks out. I'm 5 weeks out from my next show. So the last time I competed was about 2 years ago. Honestly, like 2 years ago today, maybe, actually, which is kind of wild, or soon. And so for the last 2 years, a lot of people are like, oh, so you're taking a break? And it's like, it's not how bodybuilding works.
Right.
But yeah, for the last 2 years, I've been putting on as much muscle as possible. And now I am going to compete again in the next 5 weeks. That's going to be my pro debut in this federation. And then I'm going to do an amateur show in the IMBF or WMBF. I think it's commonly regarded as one of, if not the most competitive natural bodybuilding federation in the world. So I'm going to hope, my hope is to get my pro card there. And my distant goal is to compete. I'm not trying to get ahead of myself, but my distant goal is to compete at the 2025 INBF, WNBF World Championship. That's like my distant goal. I would have to like win a pro show in that federation and otherwise. But that is kind of my distant goal personally. I will be content regardless of what the results happen of these shows because I'm very happy with the progress that I've been able to make. And when it comes to bodybuilding, you never know who's going to show up that day. You know, whether I get first place or dead last at a show, that is dependent on everyone else. When it comes to bodybuilding for me, I've been very content with the improvements in the package that I've been able to bring. So as long as I am constantly improving the look and the package that I'm bringing to show, I am never going to be disappointed. Selfishly, of course, I want to win. But at the same time, I would love to win and have any recognition that I get be pointed directly towards God for like his faithfulness in allowing me to pursue this, like keeping me healthy. And at the same time, like reminding me that my identity is not my performance in the sport and not in what I look like, but in being an image bearer, which is such a cool juxtaposition because it's like, my value is not in what I look like, despite competing in a sport where I'm being judged based on what I look like. And like that was why, like when I first started pursuing it, I was like, can this even be done? And I think my answer is yes, but it really depends on kind of your heart position and kind of what motivates you. And if my only motivation is like to beat other people and to look better, not to hate on anyone else who, like, you know, if that's your motivation and such. But for me, like, yeah, I knew that wouldn't be out of faith, and that would be putting a lot of my, you know, value in my performance. And, not that I can't look back, not that I can't be proud of, like, a physique and achievements that, you know, God has granted me, like, to achieve. But goal being, I really do want to excel in bodybuilding. I really love the sport. I'm passionate about it. I mean, my job is related to it. I don't only work with bodybuilders, but I really love it. And yeah, so that's kind of my distant goal. I've got 2 shows coming up, one in 5 weeks, one in 7 weeks, and just very excited to like practice what I preach and to like compete again, which is awesome. I've been wanting to compete for a long time, but I think it was a wiser decision for me to be patient and to take time. It takes time to build muscle, especially as a natural athlete. If you compete every single year, you're not building muscle for a year, unfortunately, because when you have to get show lean, you're lucky if you hold on to all your muscle. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, excited about that. And then distant future, I think a handful of years from now, starting a family. That's something that's huge on my wife and I's heart. We were both in agreement that it doesn't have to be immediate. Like that would be a blessing, but at the same time, we are not in a rush, and we both kind of want to pursue our careers a little bit. And bodybuilding is a hobby. I wish I could say it's a career, but it's not like I'm getting paid to. I'm paying to bodybuild. Right. I'm not getting paid to bodybuild. But yeah, that's kind of near future goal.
So when this comes out, we'll actually be past that 5-week show. I'm not sure about the 7-week show, but shout out your Instagram handle real quick for any listeners who I'm sure would want to hop over and see what ended up happening, because I'm sure you're going to post the results.
Absolutely. So I came up with it myself at Randall Royall. But
very creative.
Thank you. It's Randall, and then last name is with 2 L's, Royal. That's my Instagram handle. I do try to post content that is encouraging and knowledgeable. Like I will also post content about our business, like Level Up Physiques. But one of the things that I want to promote is, at the end of the day, I want people to be able to pursue like spiritual, mental, and physical like health. And that's what I would like for my social media to be. I want to be transparent. I think one of the issues of the fitness industry is a lack of transparency and an oversaturation of information. So I try my best to make all my content like transparent, clear, and try to help people navigate things that aren't being talked about. And like, yes, I will post physique updates, but I hope at the same time I have tried to post updates that are like, hey, this is what my body usually looks like, which is very different than post-workout pump. Like, and me right now, like in the photos that I've taken most recently, very important to note, I do not look like that year round. In fact, like I am the leanest I've been in 2 years because I have to be. That's for my show, not because I feel fantastic right now.
Right.
And yeah, hopefully it's not showing too much, but you know, my energy in the evenings sucks. Like that's a part of it. Hunger, you know, it's not my first rodeo, so it doesn't really bother me. It's there. And workouts are still going well, but that's from kind of optimizing things. Navigating holidays and family is really tough at times. Not even because of the resisting food part, but kind of the like unspoken pressure from family, or more so the questions. It's like, and I'm not criticizing anyone that asks, but they're like, you know, they start getting self-conscious because you're just present there.
Right,
and
right.
it's like, they're like, oh, like, is this okay to eat? And I'm like, yeah, you're fine. Or they're like, I'm so sorry for like eating in front of you. And it's like, that's okay. I just want you to live your life. Like you're perfectly fine. I enjoy this thing that I'm pursuing. I'm actually not like, I am doing this out of my own volition. And then like, you'll know it's like, oh, can you have this food is a very common question. And I'm not hating on anyone that asks it, but at the same time, it's like, it's not that in bodybuilding you can't have particular foods per se, but some are definitely going to help you achieve your goals much better than others. And one of the biggest things at this point in my prep is kind of controlling like what those things are. Like that's pretty important, and me being able to track what those things are is very important. So if someone offers me like, hey, here's a random salad, it's not that that's unhealthy, and it's not that I can't eat that per se, but especially if I don't know what it's made up of, like it's very hard for me. It's not unhealthy, it's just that, hey, like I would rather know what I'm kind of eating so that I can feel confident in kind of making sure I'm hitting my goals, if that makes sense. And that's why eating out is really difficult, not because there are no good options, even though a lot of times they're not.
Right.
It's just that it's really hard to like control that when we need to be likely very controlled at this point.
What's your guilty pleasure food?
A lot. I mean, I've got a huge sweet tooth. So like right now in prep, my guilty pleasure is like my yogurt bowl. I'll have like 2 yogurt bowls a day. It's awesome. I'll take yogurt, mix whey protein, put in like a cereal and some fruit. It's delicious. Now if we're talking like
Something not
good,
healthy.
okay, Reese's peanut butter cup, 100%. That
Ice
is,
cream or just like the candy by itself?
I love by itself, but yeah, the ice cream, yeah. Like, I mean, I have a huge sweet tooth. Cinnamon rolls are like my favorite thing on this planet.
Dude,
like, yeah,
good choice.
Like, so, just because I bodybuild doesn't mean I can't be a like a foodie. Like, I love, my favorite thing to do is go eat a new restaurant with my wife. Like, I love food. And what's really interesting about this is like bodybuilding initially really hurt my relationship with food, but I can confidently say that now, even though it's not like there are no issues, but like now my appreciation for food has gone up dramatically. Like for context, you know, bodybuilding puts you in a very easy position to develop disordered eating habits. Because you are, one way or another, you're constantly just ignoring your own hunger signals. You're either eating more than your body needs to like build muscle, or you're eating less than your body needs to get rid of fat. And so like you are constantly ignoring what your body kind of needs to maintain homeostasis. And with that, you can very easily develop an unhealthy relationship with food, with tracking, anxiety about not knowing particular foods. Guys, don't be too concerned with it. If you're not stepping on stage for bodybuilding, like right now, I have to be very specific, like if I want to excel at my sport. But for the average person, I would not recommend like having that much anxiety like over the specific things that you're eating. But it's very easy to do, even if you're not bodybuilding, just like wanting to lose weight or otherwise, it can be very stressful. So for context, when you've been dieting for as long as you need to for a bodybuilding show, you can get into the habit of binge eating. And binge eating can be really scary because you can eat massive quantities of food. And I had developed some of those habits. I coached myself for my bodybuilding shows. And for my first show, I made all the mistakes you could possibly make. I am grateful for that now so that I can make sure my clients don't make the same mistakes and I can relate. But, you know, I had a lot of disordered eating habits, and I binged a handful of times, like in that prep, because I dieted for too long. I didn't get lean enough for my first show. I got dead last. I didn't get lean enough, and I dieted for 6 months. That is a recipe for hating food or like having a very unhealthy relationship with food. And ironically, it was because I didn't diet aggressive enough in the beginning. The longer you're in a deficit, the more negative effects start to happen. And that is kind of irrelevant at how lean you are. It's still relevant, but like if you're just kind of perpetually dieting forever, that's usually not great because your body will start making adaptations in other ways to be like, hey, we need to stop losing weight at this point. So in prep, you're like, how can I, as healthy as possible, slowly starve myself in an aggressive enough way to where I'm not dieting too long, but not too aggressive to where I'm not accumulating more of the negative effects from crash dieting. So regardless, after my first show, when my relationship with food was bad, my family took me to Salt Lick, bless their hearts. Salt Lick, fantastic. But everyone was giving me their food. Everyone was giving me their ice cream, their barbecue and stuff. When you've prepped for that long, your hunger signals are not going to tell you that you are full. I ate food until my stomach hurt and I actually had to throw up because my stomach could not handle the amount of food that I put in my body. And I knew it was a lot of food, but my brain was going, eat. You are hungry. Like I put down my meal and like 2 other people's meals, and like they're like, hey, let's get blueberry cobbler. I was like, all right, you know, and so like I physically threw up. And post that show, my weight regain for that was so fast, and people don't prepare you for the mental part of that. But I can confidently say after my next show, my relationship with food, praise God, was much better. And you know, we went out to Yard House at the Domain because I got to compete in Austin that year. We went out to the Yard House. I got a burger, chips, queso, and a margarita. Amazing. And then I was back on kind of dieting after that, and like for like gaining weight and putting on muscle and stuff. And that was amazing. And I was like, praise God for fattier meats, for cheese. Like it was like, oh God, like this is amazing. And like at the end of the day, food is not moral. Like food is an amoral thing. So I don't want to demonize food. I don't want to demonize Oreos or like, you know, Cheetos and things like that. Those aren't the healthiest things in the world, but usually the reason why they're dangerous is not because I eat an Oreo and now my body's going to spontaneously combust. Like the issue is more that they are so tasty and they're so delicious and they're more calorically dense, therefore they are way easier to overconsume. And usually it's the overconsumption and it's the excess calories and it's the higher body fat percentages that lead to all these health risks, rather than like, it is not this food by itself. We just need to be slightly aware that you can 100% have these foods just in moderation. It's like, you know, some people get so hyper aware that I have clients of mine that are in a caloric surplus, so they're trying to gain weight and put on muscle. They're like, Coach, I'm so sorry. Like I had a cookie last night. And I was like, and like I've had someone say that, and I've gone
The confession.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude, well, hey, I was like, man, I appreciate your honesty, but I'm like, to be honest, like some people need like tight adherence to a diet, but like to be honest, for someone that is sustainable and trying to live a healthy life, I'm like, man, if you don't let yourself have a cookie when you're in a caloric surplus, you will never eat a cookie. Like I had someone come to me, it's like, Coach, don't worry, I pack my own food to Thanksgiving. And I go, that's a whole other thing. Like that's,
Right.
so, you know, a lot of people think that, a lot of people look at me, you know, because they know I'm a bodybuilder, and then, you know, at our Bible study group, someone brought cookies and I have one, and people are like, oh, you can have that? And it's like, you know, and like, which I get it, but at the same time, it's like, you know, there are times to be specific, especially if you're bodybuilding. But man, especially if you're not a bodybuilder, like, you know, I don't want you to feel like a ton of guilt and shame, like about particular foods. Like, enjoy your foods, but it is important to understand the context of like, hey, if you're pursuing a healthy life, there are two things to consider. It's like, one, healthy in terms of like nutrition in your body, yes, but also healthy in terms of healthy relationship with food. Like, if you can control your food, but your relationship with food is terrible, which is a lot of people that are very fit. It's like, you might be able to control your physique, but that doesn't mean that you have a healthy relationship with food or your physique. Like, there are people with worse relationships with food that are super lean and shredded than people that like don't pursue fitness and nutrition at all. Like, so I think like a lot of people want to say like, oh, if you're like overweight or obese, therefore like your relationship with food is terrible. And it's like, that's not necessarily always like the case. In fact, I would argue that a lot of people that are hyper aware of fitness and pursuing that often have unhealthy relationships. It's like, for example, during my first bodybuilding show, I had a lot of unhealthy habits. And I've talked about all these idols in my life. Food has been another one. And like the idolization of food and looking for food to truly comfort and satisfy me instead of like Christ. And it's not to say you can't enjoy food. You should enjoy food. It's made to be enjoyed. But at the same time, for example, when I was on my show prep, I would do things like, okay, I don't have a lot of calories left in my day. So what am I going to do? I literally bought like pounds of broccoli and like cooked it, put it all in a big bowl with condiments because I wanted to eat a lot of something and feel full. Now, like in some contexts, eating like foods that have low calorie density can be smart because it can give you that feeling of satiation. That's a good strategy and technique. But when you start relying on that for comfort, like most people struggle with food. I struggle with food a lot more in temptation when I'm bored. Like if I'm staying at home, man, it is hard to resist food that is there. If I'm working and I'm like working out and I'm on the go, I'm not thinking about food. Why? Because I'm doing other things. But like when I'm at home and the fridge is right there, especially if there's something tasty, like you will think about it. You will go to it. Why? Because you are bored and that can satisfy you and that can give you a dopamine hit. So it's like we don't want to become dependent on food in terms of like that dopamine hit. And that doesn't mean we can't enjoy food. We need to enjoy it for what it is, but that's when we start like leaning and depending on it. Yes, we need food for fuel and for energy, but like for the emotional like comfort aspect of it. And I'm not saying you should never go get ice cream if you're feeling terrible. Like that's not what I'm saying, but at the same time, we need to be like aware of that and aware that some foods make it really easy to overconsume. Like if you ever look at your local soda, if you see that there's sodium in the soda, start thinking about it. Salt and sodium is not making that soda taste better. So why does sodium exist in soda? Well, because it makes you thirsty. What do you do when you're thirsty? You drink more soda. So it's important to acknowledge that a lot of these snacks and these foods are made to be consumed. And they make more money if you consume more of them. So it's not that these foods are inherently evil. In fact, they're super tasty and they're made to be that way. But we just need to be aware that, like, when the advertisement for, I don't know if it's a Cheez-It or something, it's like, can't have just, it's Pringles. It's like, can't have just one. It's like, yeah, that's how they were engineered. Right.
Yep.
Like, so that's the thing. I'm never going to sit here and be like, never have a Cheeto, never have a Pringle, never have an Oreo, never have a dessert. Like, please don't do any of those things. Enjoy all of those foods, but there may be contexts in which they can be enjoyed better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Randall, this has been good.
Yeah.
We could go through, fitness is one of those topics where, because it involves mindset, diet, training regimens, bodybuilding, we could ramble about this for 2 more hours, but I think we're at a good point at this one. First off to you, thank you so much for being here, for imparting some not only fitness advice there at the end, but for just being so genuine and transparent with your story for the first 50 to 75% of the episode. That was awesome to hear it firsthand, and I'm excited to share it with the audience, so that'll be good. To you, the audience, if you stuck with us through this episode, I'm assuming you liked it. No one listens to a podcast for 3 hours because they hate it. So with that being said, please do me a favor and help us spread Randall's show to whatever young man out there might be going through a similar college situation or football situation. Like I've told you guys on multiple episodes, I think that every episode that we record is made for at least one person, but I don't know who that person is. So help us find them by subscribing to the YouTube channel, giving the show a 5-star rating on Spotify, and then giving the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. What's cool is on Apple, so you can also write a review as to what you thought of this episode specifically, what you think of the show as a whole. So please leave some words of encouragement. If you want to leave some for Randall, I will definitely screenshot those and pass them on to him. With that being said, guys, I hope you have a healthy and happy Saturday night, and thanks for tuning in. Bye, everyone.